Well, last night, America's central bank, the Federal Reserve, raised its rates by 0.25%, but indicated it may soon call time on any further hikes. So, where the Fed leads, the Bank of England follows. We'll be live at the bank shortly with Liam, but also let's update you on breaking news coming through with junior doctors belonging to the British Medical Association just announcing they will be back on strike for 4 days between April the 11th and the 15th. That's just being announced. They had been holding talks with Health Secretary Steve Barclay yesterday, but it appears that's broken down with indications they're still pressing for a 35% pay rise. We'll be doing the sums on that too here on GB News Live. So, the Bank of England about to make that decision on whether to raise the base rate for the 11th consecutive time. It's at 4% at the moment, to remind you. Let's bring in the old lady of Threadneedle Street and Liam Halligan at the Bank of England, just to set the scene for us, because you're not an old man by any means. However, the old lady behind you may still have a few teeth to actually get hold of inflation, Liam.
I like what you did there, Mark. Yeah, here I am down in the heart of the city of London, the Bank of England just behind me, the Royal Exchange over the other shoulder. We have the Bank of England about to release its latest interest rate decision. We're expecting, I think in all probability, a rise from 4% to 4.25%, as you say. It would be the 11th successive rise in interest rates by the Bank of England's Monetary Policy Committee. If the interest rate does go up by 0.25%, 25 basis points, as we say, that's likely to add, I'm afraid, about 350 quid to payments on a mortgage, a variable rate mortgage of about £200,000. So that's £350 per year more in payments on your average mortgage of £200,000 if the Bank of England does raise interest rates at noon, which is in just a few minutes.
And of course, it's in addition to the pain everyone's feeling with the cost of living crisis, this recent 10.4% inflation rate, where, you know, groceries, the staples in the food basket, ever higher. So people are hurting from that. And that's the reason why the bank would be pushed to increase interest rates further.
It seems so counterintuitive, doesn't it? It seems to lack all logic, but economics is sometimes like that, especially when you're on the receiving end of policy decisions made by people often behind closed doors. Of course, we just saw earlier this week inflation go up in the UK. In February, the consumer price index, a basket of goods, was priced 10.4% up on the same month in 2022. That's up from 10.1% in January. We thought inflation would come down into single digits. It didn't happen. And that does put the Bank of England on the horns of a dilemma, because the bank will want to be seen to respond by pressing down on household demand, by pressing down on investment by firms in order to keep a lid on those price rises. On the other hand, of course, we have all these jitters, as you said in your introduction, Mark, on global financial markets. We have banks falling over, including systemically important banks like Credit Suisse in Switzerland. We've now got a bank in Switzerland, the Credit Suisse UBS merged bank, that's bigger than the whole economy of Switzerland. So there's trouble in some parts of the global banking system. To raise interest rates while markets are jittery is something that the bank will think hard about doing before it goes ahead with it. But as you say, the mighty Federal Reserve in the US, they just raised interest rates overnight. And so the Bank of England will feel it's got some kind of cover. So I do think in all probability, unfortunately, if you're a mortgage holder, good news if you're a saver and the bank's passed the interest rate on the high street banks, I do think we're going to see an interest rate rise to 4.25% pretty much any minute. And I'll be bringing that news to you over the sound of the drilling just in front of me.
Well, hopefully we'll be able to hear you. But as you said, the Fed has moved in the States. We normally follow that lead. But interestingly, they're indicating that, they may call time on any further rate hikes for a while because of these worries about the banking sector. And we'll get the Bank of England later talking about what their outlook is and whether, in fact, this could be topping out now, whether 4.25% could be it, and then rates start to fall from here on in.
I think that's right. We've got to remember, of course, in America, they've really got their arms around inflation in America. Inflation in America, the headline rate equivalent to our consumer price index rate, Mark, is down at 6%. So quite a lot lower than it is here in the UK. But still, the Federal Reserve wanted to put in what I agree with you is probably a final rate rise in this cycle in order to really indicate that inflation is going to be stamped on and they're not going to stand for it, in order to, what we say in economics, bear down on those inflation expectations. So wage claims are lower and you don't get price rises locked into supply chains. I think here in the UK as well, as long as we see inflation come down in March, and I think we will, as long as we see that, then I think the Bank of England, like the Fed, will make this its last interest rate rise, which will come as some relief to many mortgage holders out there.
Yeah, because obviously a lot of people try and do their sums, although it's interesting that fixed-rate mortgages are actually declining. They're coming down a little bit, but even though well above 5% at the moment. So, as you say, adding hundreds of pounds every month to people, having to pay out of taxed income, of course, to get the mortgage paid.
Those mortgage rates are coming down, Mark, even though rates are going up, because the mortgage companies, they tend to look at where interest rates are going to go and where inflation is going to go. They sort of move to where the puck is going to end up rather than where the puck currently is, to use an analogy by that Canadian ice skating legend Wayne Gretzky that's often used in economics. But so lots of people, I know in my own life, I'm stopped in the street, I'm stopped in the newsroom at GBNews, I'm stopped on the train, people saying to me, I need to remortgage my house, what's going to happen to interest rates, what's going to happen to inflation? Economics can sometimes sound a bit otherworldly, but when it comes down to it, it really, really
we've
matters.
got,
and that's why we're all on tenterhooks here.
We've got, I think, a quarter point and 0.25% being indicated, so as expected. And, of course, that means it's now at 4.25%. Not as high as it could have gone, Liam, but indications, of course, that the inflation that we saw this week coming through is actually what they call domestic. It's not coming yet from the international sector, so that the bank is hoping really this will have a direct effect on bearing down on this inflation.
I think that's right. Let's just take a look at a graphic and we can put this latest interest rate rise in some kind of historic context. If we look at this graph, and radio listeners can bear with me, we see from 2017 interest rates were gradually rising to 1% as we came out of the financial crisis. Then lockdown happened, interest rates went down to 0 and then 0.25%. And then, since inflation really ripped in the back end of 2022, we've seen 11 successive interest rate rises there to 4.25% today. That's a 14-year high in interest rates. It's not particularly high by historic standards, but I must say it feels really, really high. If you took out a mortgage, any time since 2008 when interest rates have been much, much lower. I think a real problem we have, Mark, is that a lot of people in financial markets, they're not used to interest rates at this level. Yeah. That's why so many people have been caught unawares with the fact that holding government bonds, when interest rates go up, the value of them goes down, the price of them goes down, your balance sheet looks weaker. That's why lots of banks have been in danger of toppling over, as it were. But I think in the here and now, this is not as bad as it could have been. This will add about £350 to the mortgage of an average household with a £200,000 variable rate mortgage. That's an extra £350 a year on their payments. That's pretty painful. If you're a saver, Mark, do get onto your bank and say, are you going to pass on this interest rate rise to me? A lot of banks are not passing on those interest rate rises to savers in full because our high street banking system, sorry, but it's just not very competitive. Yeah. So customers may have to shop around if they want to feel the full benefit of that interest rate rise. It could have gone up 50 basis points, 0.5% mark. I don't think that was expected, so we've ended up with a quarter-point rise.
Yeah, and as you're saying, clearly the fixed rate deals at the moment have come back a little bit, so there's a bit of wriggle room perhaps for people trying to work out their mortgages. But the other aspect of today, of course, is that we get Andrew Bailey there at the bank indicating what they think is going to happen in the weeks and months ahead. They get this forecast for the economy. And the other key element about all this is, what growth will be coming into the economy to help to things make easier overall, and indeed what dangers that could still be out there in the banking sector.
That's right. This will be the first utterance from the Bank of England, the minutes of this meeting since the budget. Of course, at the budget, Jeremy Hunt's latest budgetary statement, we had new forecasts from the Office for Budget Responsibility which showed the UK avoiding recession. Not great growth, in fact, still contracting this year, the economy, but by a lot less than was previously thought. That, of course, will be good news to most households. But it'll be interesting to see, Mark, what I'll be looking for when I get off the this discussion with you and manage to look at the minutes, is whether or not the bank has changed its outlook on inflation because of that number we had earlier this week, that February inflation. It went up from 10.1% to 10.4%, when I think most people expected inflation to fall further. It has been on a downward trajectory. Will the Bank of England change its inflation outlook because of that February number, or will it view February, as I suspect it will, as a bit of a blip? That will be really interesting, and what the bank says on that will impact financial markets and where mortgage rates go from here.
Yeah, because we had that sort of shortage of fresh fruit and veg, of course, in January to February. We have got a little bit coming through now, Liam. Let's just run this past people, because this is a bit of good news, just to add to the doom and gloom. And this is, we were talking about growth and their forecasts. The bank is saying it expects the UK economy to grow slightly between April and June. Now, that's revised its previous forecast, you remember, when they said that GDP or growth would actually drop by 0.4%. So they are seeing a few of these green shoots out there.
Some of us have been saying it for a while, Mark.
There we go.
Indeed, look, the Bank of England was previously very, very gloomy. The Bank of England was forecasting a recession and economic contraction lasting for 5 successive quarters, over a year. The OBR, the Office of Budget Responsibility, is now slightly less gloomy, and the Bank of England as well. And look, these forecasts made by people with spreadsheets in, behind closed doors, they may feel as if they don't matter to ordinary men and women trying to make a living and do the best for themselves and their families. But these forecasts do matter, Mark, because they influence financial markets, they influence investment decisions. They're poured over by business leaders, whether the business is big or small, whether or not they're going to take on more people, whether they're going to invest more in their business. And so these are important forecasts, and it is good news that in general, most economic forecasts, albeit from a low base, of growth, of the UK's economic performance, are now looking up. And I also think a little bit of good news, just to sweeten the pill, is that this will be the last interest rate rise in this cycle by the Bank of England.
Yeah, just to indicate their thinking, we're just learning that 7 members of the Monetary Policy Committee, this is the committee that sets the base rate, voted to increase by 0.25%. 2 members, Swati Ringra and Silvana Traneo, voted against the rise, arguing some of the recent increases in the base rate have not yet filtered through to the real economy. Now, that's quite an interesting point, isn't it? That the fact they've been pushing all these months, when does it actually have a direct effect on the economy?
2 things stem from that. The first thing is that none of the 9 voted for a 0.5% interest rate rise, so that was never going to happen. Second thing that's interesting about that is that you've now got respected members of the Monetary Policy Committee voting to keep rates on hold. Not only because, rightly, they're saying that, look, we've had 11 successive interest rate rises, they take some time to work their way through the economy, to influence decisions both by households and firms. That's exactly right. There's a lot of monetary tightening in the tank, if you want. So if you will. So that is an important point. I think another really important point also, though, is that increasingly, I'm sensing this, increasingly economists are saying, hang on a minute, this inflation that we've got, it's not actually inflation because people are spending too much cash. It's not inflation because businesses are investing too much. On the contrary, consumer spending is pretty lackluster. On the contrary, business investment is still in the doldrums. The inflation that's coming through, it's supply chain inflation still. It's the implications of lockdown. The global economy has not yet fully rebooted. It's the implications of the fact that farmers across Britain and elsewhere paid a lot of money for their fertiliser this time last year in the immediate aftermath of the war in Ukraine. They paid a lot of money for their fuel when they were sowing their crops last summer. Those high numbers are still in the mix. That's why food inflation will linger. The price of going to a restaurant or hospitality industry, enjoying some of that, those prices will stay high. So inflation will take some time to pass through the system, though I do think we'll see sharp annual falls in the price of fuel and also in the price of electricity, utility bills coming through this spring and summer, which will pull the headline rate of inflation down. I do think Rishi Sunak will hit that target of halving inflation to around 5% by the end of the year, although it will be nothing to do with him and his policies if he does.
Yeah, OK. Well, we've got the latest snapshot anyway. Liam, thank you for updating us there at the bank. Just to reiterate that breaking news, we've got a 0.25% rise in the base rate. It is now at 4.25%. But in addition, and this is equally important, the Bank of England indicates it expects growth in the economy, the gross domestic product, to actually increase slightly in the next 3 months from April onwards. Now, that's reversed its earlier forecast that the economy would shrink by 0.4%. So they think maybe there is some light there at the end of the economic tunnel. Let's get out and about now and speak to Jeff Moody, our West of England reporter. He's been talking to locals about how this all impacts on their market at South Molton, of course, in Devon. Lovely part of the world there, Dartmoor. What's the reaction there, Jeff?
Well, Mark, I came here back in the autumn, just when Jeremy Hunt issued his first fiscal statement, if you can remember back that far. And I was talking to stallholders about how prepared they were for a long, hard winter. So I thought it was worth coming back today to see whether they've survived that long, hard winter and how things are looking now we've heard this interest rate rise news. So I'm talking to Penny from the Silk Garden. Hello to you, Penny.
Hello.
Still here?
Yes, indeed, yes.
So we're just hearing that interest rates have gone up as we thought that they would do. Does that affect you personally?
It does actually, yes. Since last summer, our mortgage has gone up by £300, which is quite a chunk of money to find.
And now, presumably, it'll go up even more?
Well, yes.
Are you managing to survive?
Yep, we're okay. We're okay, thank you very much.
So talk to me about your stall. You're selling silk flowers and jewellery, I noticed. Good trade at the moment?
It was really good through the winter, actually, I must say. I don't think any of us got any complaints. The market's been very successful, and Will and Mel have worked like Trojans, and we've just won this amazing award, and this fabulous.
Tell us what the award is.
Oh, we're the best parish and community market in the whole country, so we're very pleased with ourselves.
What an achievement that is!
Yeah, and the whole town does so. Does well as well. They've got some fabulous independent shops.
So you're cosseted a little bit from the main headwinds, aren't you? Because you don't have the overheads that shops do for a start?
Yes, that's true. We're very lucky, and we've got a fabulous and very loyal local team of shoppers that come back to us over and over again. And in fact, I had a couple last weekend who came all the way from Dorset to find quality silk flowers, which was lovely to see them again.
That is incredible, people coming all that way, isn't it? Yes. No, so you sell silk flowers and jewellery, all of which is absolutely beautiful, none of which is essential.
No.
Are you finding it hard? Because surely the first thing that people will cut back on in a cost of living crisis is flowers for their home, more jewellery.
Yes, I think you're right. But we're very cosseted here in the sense that there's a lovely proportion of people that come back to us and are very loyal to the market and to the town. Plus, we've got all the holiday people come down from London, and of course, or from points wherever, and find us very reasonably priced, I think, compared to city prices. So we've done okay, I think.
That's brilliant. Penny, thank you very much indeed. So things are doing particularly well at South Molton Market. They do say that they are protected a little bit, if you like, because they don't have the vast overheads that you would associate with retail. But for now, back to you, Mark.
Nice to see the flowers aren't wilting under all the pressure of this here in South Molton. Thank you very much to you both in Devon. But let's reflect a bit more coming through from the bank, just to explain, as well as the interest rate decision, of course. They give this snapshot on where they think the economy is going. Now, they have reversed their earlier forecast that the economy will be shrinking. They say now that there will be a slight increase in growth the 3 months from April. The bank saying, while subdued overall activity, holding up better than contacts had previously expected, particularly in the consumer service sector, says the bank. The government decision then to cancel that planned £500 rise in energy bills, or up the rate from April, will help households, the bank saying. Real household disposable income could remain broadly flat in the near term rather than falling significantly, according to its forecast. And this is interesting. The bank says it's remaining calm about that surprise jump in the inflation rate to 10.4%, saying it expects the consumer price index, that's CPI, the official inflation rate, to fall significantly in the third quarter of this year into the autumn, and even further than its economists had previously forecast, thanks to that energy bill support. So maybe if we can hold on, says the bank, things will get better towards the end of the year. However, of course, you've still got to pay your mortgage in the meantime, and as we've heard, it could mean an extra £350 to people having to pay those mortgages. Let's hear now from mortgage advisor and broker Sally Mitchell. Sally, thanks for joining us again. We spoke to you, of course, last time we had the interest rate going up, trying to work out, was this the end of it? But indications, perhaps, both from America and here in London, that this may top out now at this sort of rate.
Yeah, I've heard analysts say that they think it will top out about 4.5% middle of this year. I mean, this is the 11th increase in a row we've had. We should be getting used to it. But of course, the knock-on effect for mortgage people who have mortgages, accounts, is huge.
Do you think that some of the banks, some of the building societies will try and absorb this, bearing in mind what the bank is saying about things probably going to get quite a lot better by the end of this year?
Yeah, it's interesting to see how they react. I've already had some announcements this morning from lenders saying that their variable rate, their standard rate, is already going up, I guess, ahead of the announcement. But what we have to consider is that the vast majority of people, they're on fixed rate mortgages, and they don't really get so affected by the base rate going up. It's the variable rates and the tracker rates that you get hit hardest with first.
Yeah, and obviously people on those sorts of deals can chop and change a bit more than when you're on the fixed rates. I am just sort of reading that fixed rates are at their lowest level in 6 months, but obviously still way above 5%. So why would that be?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, when you're looking at the whole market, there's so many factors to consider. I have actually placed a mortgage yesterday at 3.99%. So there are better deals out there. If you have a specific criteria or a little bit of adverse, obviously you're going to be pushed up into the higher amounts. But it all depends really on what the swap rates are doing for fixed rate mortgages. And they have been continuing to come down since the mini budget spike. And they're not quite as directly affected by the base rate as other rates.
So, therefore, I guess for those people trying to remortgage, or if their fixed rate is coming to an end, don't panic, because things might get a little bit easier in the months ahead.
Yeah, we've already seen a nice little increase, or settling of rates. It's hard to predict how the market's really going to react, but certainly we haven't seen the increases in our fixed rates that we've seen in the base rate. So, yes, it's going to be higher than what you're used to, what you perhaps fixed on 2 years ago, 5 years ago. That's still going to be difficult and a shock, but it's not as bad as it was 2 months ago.
Right, and in another 2 months might be easier yet again as things start to ease.
So.
Yeah. OK, Sally, thank you very much.
Oh, that's all right.
Sorry to interrupt you. Yeah, go on.
No, I was just going to say, of course, it's not just the mortgage rates. It's the people I speak to are worried about inflation that we're talking about now. The cost of living has really gone up an awful lot. So people are being squeezed on all sides. Yeah,
as we're looking at that sort of basket of goods, milk 42.2%, eggs 32.5%, bread 20.8% annual inflation. Yeah. Ouch.
Yeah.
Anyway, Sally.
Ouch.
Yeah, thank you very much indeed on that note. We'll speak to you again next month and see where we are. Maybe things might be on hold then, who knows. But for the moment, thank you very much indeed. So that's the potential impact for homeowners and mortgage borrowers across the country. But what about the bigger picture economic analysis from Vicky Price now, Chief Economic Advisor at the Centre for Economic and Business. Thank you very much, Vicky, for joining us. As I was saying, the Bank of England indicating things in terms of growth and the state of the economy might be a little bit better in the 3 months ahead than they were originally fearing.
Well, what they are doing is reflecting what the Office for Budget Responsibility had said, and they have revised, I presume, the Bank of England as well, their own forecasts, which is that in 2023, instead of seeing a drop of 1.4%, this is what the OBR thought originally, we will see a drop of just 0.2%. But of course, one of the reasons for why we were going to be seeing a better outcome, according to the OBR, was that we were also going to get interest rates lower than they otherwise would have been, and that inflation was going to drop very significantly, so offsetting a little bit some of the problems that people already have in terms of their household disposable incomes. So the fact that, of course, the Bank of England has now raised interest rates, it's quite interesting, and if it intends to do it again, maybe that forecast will need to be rethought. Maybe we are going to be looking at perhaps not such a rosy look ahead, but individuals and businesses being hit by those higher interest rates and that effect lasting for a little bit longer.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a relentless sort of rise, 11 months. And was the indication with what the Fed did last night that really London had to follow on this, given the inflation figures, but then tempering, of course, the worries of what it might do to the banking sector and these bank failures?
Well, absolutely. I think there is a concern, and still a concern, and there was a concern even before the Federal Reserve raised its rates, that perhaps these very high interest rates that we have seen and the very rapid increase in interest rates has caused quite a lot of problems in the banking system. We've seen the failures in the US when bond prices, of course, which had been falling, affected the ability of those banks to get more liquidity by selling those bonds in the market because they immediately incurred big losses. And we're seeing, of course, here as well in Europe, where there has been a bit of contagion, if you like, concern, particularly because of the Credit Suisse issue, that we may end up with banks not wanting to lend to A, to each other, and B, to anything risky at all. So what we may end up having is a lot lower lending or loans becoming available both to businesses and to individuals in the coming few months, which will slow the economy down anyway. That, of course, will bring inflation down faster, but I don't think that's necessarily what the Bank of England is counting on. So yes, the background is a pretty dangerous one, just as you're suggesting, and just this little extra increase, which we've done just following what the Fed did, we generally tend to do so, may just be something that you need to really watch out for in terms of the impact of the economy. So we are, I think, right at the peak of interest rate increases, and maybe when it's necessary, we might start seeing rates coming down faster than perhaps we would have anticipated without these banking pressures that we've seen.
Yeah, I mean, people will be trying to get their heads around the fact that the bank is now saying, or remaining calm about this surprise jump in the inflation rate for February at 10.4%, saying that the consumer price index is likely to fall significantly in the third quarter or even further than economists previously forecast. Why, therefore, did they get caught out with this surprise rate? I mean, was it just the fact that we didn't have any tomatoes in our supermarkets?
Well, the interesting thing is that prices for vegetables and for food more generally have been going up in many countries in the last few months, including in Europe. If you look at some of the increases that they've had in their shops, they've been even greater than they've been here. So I think there's been a general issue. We, of course, had shortages, whereas they didn't have shortages. Just prices have been going up for all sorts of reasons, including energy costs for greenhouses, where they've been growing lots of things, and droughts that we've seen, and all that. So the expectation is that we perhaps are reaching a limit to that inflation as well here. There is a concern about whether, of course, some of the supermarkets are profiteering and raising the prices rather too highly. And we know that, interestingly enough, the ones that are cheapest so like the Aldi's of this world, have tended to be also the ones that have raised the prices more than the other supermarkets. So there is a bit of catching up, and that is, of course, understandable, given that we've had such high energy costs for those organizations, and of course shortage of labor, which has pushed wages up as well. So it's a bit of catching up. So I don't think that's going to remain. But remember, inflation, the way it's calculated now, it's not just necessarily what happens in a month, it's year on year. So what the expectation now is that if things stabilize where they are, and we start, particularly on the energy front, comparing where we were even a year ago, later this year, in the next few months, then you see that the increase will be so small. If things stabilize, then you could get to zero growth, to zero inflation, even for some of the elements that we're looking at in the next few months. And that's how it works. And that's why I think everyone is anticipating now that we're going to end up with lower inflation. Energy prices, as you know, back down to where they were 2 years ago. Oil prices, gas prices back to where they were before the invasion. Food prices internationally have been falling for the last year. If you just look at the monthly data that exists. So it should eventually be reflected in lower prices in shops as well, one hopes.
We're finishing with a smile. What could be better? Vicky, thank you very much indeed. And we'll see, of course, what emerges in the months to come. Thank you very much indeed. Don't forget to let us know what you think about this. GBviews at gbnews.uk. How are you coping or not? How is this extra rise? 4.25% now going to affect your day-to-day living, even though the bank is saying things might get better fairly soon. More analysis coming up, and also we'll be crossing back to Westminster for reaction to the Boris Johnson show at that Privileges Committee. Who came out on top? We'll be finding out. But let's take a look at the weather now.
Hello, I'm Alex Deakin, and this is your latest weather forecast from the Met Office. A blustery, boisterous day out there, gusty winds bringing in plenty of heavy showers. Between the downpours, there will be some sunshine, but nowhere immune from the downpours. This area of low pressure is responsible. There's also a little wiggle of a waving weather front just pushing up from the south. That will bring some more persistent rain later across southern areas, certainly increasing the cloud through the afternoon here. So any sunny spells will be fairly hazy. Then lots of showers for Northern Ireland, Northern England, North Wales. A thunderstorm is possible. Not as many showers over northern Scotland, although the Northern Isles likely to stay fairly cloudy with some outbreaks of rain. The wind's a little lighter in the north as well, but elsewhere it's a blustery, gusty day. But it is quite mild. Temperatures could still reach 14 or 15 Celsius when the sun is out. We'll see a bit more in the way of rain coming into southern counties through this evening. May get into the Midlands for a time, that more persistent rain before clearing its way through East Anglia. And then we're back to more showers later in the night, chiefly for Scotland, Northern Ireland and Northern England, with southern areas becoming dry and clear. A bit of a fresher night, but still temperatures mostly staying in mid-single figures. On to Friday's details, and again, it's a case of sunshine and showers. Quite a bit of sunshine early on over the Midlands and Eastern England. Generally dry start here, but there'll be showers elsewhere. Slow-moving showers across northern parts. Further south, the showers will brush through fairly rapidly on a stiff and gusty wind. Again, between the showers, the sun will pop out, and that'll lift the temperatures into the teens in the south, 10 to 12 further north. The showery weather will continue during Friday evening. Notice the circulation here. That's where the low pressure is moving to, bringing lots of showers on Friday night across Northern Ireland and western Scotland. But as that low starts to pull away, it does look a little drier as we go through the weekend. Certainly Sunday it's drier than Saturday, and it's also going to turn colder.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit off.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, no, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, it's exactly 12:30. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB Newsroom. The Bank of England has raised the interest rate for an 11th consecutive time from 4% to 4.25%. It comes after a surprise rise in inflation and follows the decision by the US Federal Reserve to raise its key rate overnight. The central bank also announced it expects the economy to grow slightly in the second quarter. Junior doctors in England will strike for 4 days between April the 11th and 15th. The British Medical Associations accused the government of not being serious about resolving the pay dispute and says Health Secretary Steve Barclay's failed to make a credible offer. The union says the new round of strikes comes with great frustration, but that they'll not stop until they are paid what they're worth. Sir Keir Starmer's promised to make Britain's streets safe again if Labour wins the next general election. He's pledged 4 targets to modernise British policing in England and Wales in the next 10 years. They include halving levels of violence against women and girls and knife crime. It's after the Conservatives accused Labour of being soft on crime. Sir Keir also announced his party's plan to raise confidence in the police following the damning report into the Met.
Confidence is everything. It's what effective, visible, open-minded policing can provide for the communities that it serves. And as we've seen this week, it's what bad policing destroys. So let me be very clear, the next Labour government will modernise British policing.
And the UK and Welsh governments have announced 2 free ports will be created in Wales for the first time in a bid to boost the country's economy. The Celtic and Anglesey free ports in North Wales are expected to attract almost £5 billion in investment. It's also hoped they'll generate up to 20,000 jobs by the end of the decade. TV, online, DAB+ radio and on TuneIn, this is GB News. Now it's back to Mark.
Rhiannon, thank you very much indeed. So, yesterday, Boris Johnson facing that grilling at the committee of MPs, giving evidence and answering questions over whether he intentionally misled Parliament over so-called Partygate. Now, he accepted the Commons had indeed been misled, but not intentionally, and that he'd acted in good faith. But the former Prime Minister then closely questioned on how he could not have known that rules were being breached and that certain social events such as leaving drinks were, quote, essential. Well, let's speak now to the chief political correspondent in the Financial Times, Jim Pickard, who joins us from Westminster. Jim, are the results in? Does Boris Johnson survive to the next episode of the Boris Johnson show?
Yeah, I think there was something for everyone, wasn't there? If you believed in Boris Johnson, you believe he's a very honest person and hadn't misled anyone over this, I think there was some reasonable argument given by the former Prime Minister along the lines of why on earth were there loads of photographs taken by the official photographer in number 10 if everyone there at these gatherings knew that they were either breaching the rules or breaching the regulations. But there was also quite a lot there for people who are critical of Boris Johnson and who basically saw him floundering in terms of his explanations for why he thought these parties were necessary, when other people at the time, public sector workers in hospitals who were working pretty long hours as well, didn't feel the need to be boozing with their colleagues. I think there's also a lot of kind of ambiguity, I think, as well, because what this committee is trying to prove is not that parties took place. We already know that for a fact. The Metropolitan Police have dished out over 100 fines. This is all about whether Boris Johnson, a year later, was honest with MPs and whether he recklessly misled Parliament, whether he deliberately misled Parliament. I think what we saw yesterday was evidence that probably points towards recklessness, but I don't know whether it reached the threshold of deliberate, because he took advice from some officials, maybe the wrong officials, who seem to have told him, if we believe his account, that it was probably okay to say to MPs that the guidelines had been followed. And therefore, the water's a little bit muddied there. And I think you asked what the next step is. The next step is the committee will go away and make their minds up in a report that comes out probably late April or May, and they will recommend either that he gets off scot-free because there was no contempt, or they decided there was contempt of Parliament, in which case they can either make him apologise or they can give him a suspension from the House of Commons over there. And the question is whether the suspension is less than 10 days or more than 10 days. It's really crucial, because if the suspension is over 10 days, then you have a recall and you have a potential by-election in Boris Johnson's constituency of Uxbridge, which would be quite a serious thing. It's what one person close to the committee described it to me as the nuclear option. I think they will stop short of that. But I don't think there was anything yesterday that will allow Boris Johnson to get away without some kind of sanction of some sort.
Yeah. Lord Hayward, of course, indicating he believes a by-election at Uxbridge could cause serious problems in that, the Tories may not win it. But just to looking at that, and you use that phrase reckless to explain to people this is important in trying to identify what the process was in terms of following rules or indeed the guidance or otherwise. I thought it was interesting that Sir Patrick Jenkins, a senior Tory, was the one who was making the forensic questions stick to a degree, and therefore that was an indication as to what they may be thinking of in trying to prove the case of being reckless.
Yeah, so Bernard Jenkins, who's a very senior Tory MP, was asking these questions of, when you were asked questions of journalists, when the journalists started writing reports to these parties, and you, Boris Johnson, were appearing in the Commons, and you were inevitably going to be asked this question of, did parties take place? Did you know about them? Did you know there was rule breaking? Bernard Jenkins was making the point that at that point, it would have been logical for Johnson to have sought some kind of legal advice or advice from senior civil servants. But there was a big wad of documentary evidence yesterday. Simon Case, who's the head of the entire civil service, made very clear and quite blunt comments that he was asked no such thing. So there was clearly some kind of carelessness there, one would have thought, over this whole thing. I think the fact that you've got Bernard Jenkins asking quite difficult questions, it's a reminder of this theory that this is some kind of kangaroo court, to coin a phrase used by Boris Johnson's allies. Jacob Rees-Mogg was making jokes about it on Twitter last night. Jacob Rees-Mogg, I thought, should be kind of an upholder of parliamentary tradition and history. He's someone who talks a lot about parliamentary traditions. I think he would know that the Privileges Committee is something which has the respect of most of Parliament. It has a Conservative majority. The idea that this is some kind of Labour stitch-up, I think, is a little bit for the birds, to be quite honest.
Yeah, and of course, it is the whole issue about bringing Parliament in contempt as well. But last thought, in addition to this, of course, we had the vote on the Windsor framework and the rebellion failed to appear. Does that, yet again, with Boris Johnson having voted against it, indicate that really he is no longer a big beast in that jungle?
I think it's definitely a very big sign that both he and Liz Truss opposed the Windsor framework, and yet the rebellion was tiny. Along with his difficult grilling over 3 hours, it was kind of a reminder, I think, for the general public and for some Tory MPs that there was this very long period where things felt a little bit chaotic. It's now a more kind of managerial, technocratic government under Rishi Sunak. I think it was a reminder of a lot of people. They don't necessarily want to go back to that period in history. And I think for a lot of people here as well, and for Sunak's government, the fact that Eurosceptics were voting against his agreement, which, you may not like it, you may not like the fact that it still leaves the EU with some influence over Northern Ireland, but it leaves Northern Ireland less under the jurisdiction of the EU and the ECJ than the Boris Johnson agreement, which of course the DUP hated as well. And therefore, I think if you want to know why the rebellion was in such small numbers, I think it was really only some kind of unhappy people from the past and some really hardcore Eurosceptic Tory MPs who were opposed to it.
Jim, from the Financial Times, thank you very much indeed for bringing us your reaction down there at Westminster. Good to speak to you again. Thank you very much indeed. So that's Jim Pickard's analysis. What about the MPs themselves? With two MPs who thought yesterday went well for Boris Johnson, James Duddridge and Brendan Clark-Smith. They spoke to GB News after that hearing.
I think Prime Minister performed well. It's now up to the committee to look at what they think, and hopefully they'll stick by the rules, not reinvent recklessly misleading, which is not a term we'd ever heard, and not straying from the intentionally misleading.
Well, I think he was absolutely brilliant today. He came in, he was calm, he was confident. Obviously quite a grilling. I don't think anybody can say the committee hasn't been robust there, but I think he managed to answer the points very well. He was calm and collected. I think really he should be exonerated after the evidence he's given, and he was very clear that, of course, that he did not recklessly mislead the House of Commons.
More reaction, of course, to come as we get it. And as Jim Pickard was saying, it may be some time before we get the committee coming back with its findings. Now, the Prince of Wales has been making a surprise visit to Poland to thank both British and Polish troops for their support in helping Ukraine defend its territory. Today, the Prince echoed his late grandmother, the Queen, by laying a wreath at a monument dedicated to soldiers, the unknown soldier indeed, in Poland. Well, let's get more now with our royal reporter, Cameron Walker, who joins us from Warsaw. And as we said, a sort of tie-in with the late Queen's visit there. I think 1996, I seem to remember, when she laid a wreath there.
Yes, it was, Mark. It was 1996, the late Queen and Prince Philip who were here on a state's visit, but it was their grandson, Prince William, laying a wreath at the memorial, the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier in Warsaw. It was essentially a bit like the cenotaph, but in the capital of Poland. But he has moved on now and to a slightly more casual engagement. It's with young people, young Ukrainian refugees here at a food hall in Warsaw. He's had a bit of an outfit change as well, and he's meeting them, hearing their stories of fleeing their homeland from the fighting in Ukraine. The refugees he is meeting here this afternoon have been in Poland for over a year now. They have essentially integrated into Polish society, and that is one of the key themes which Prince William wants to get across, as I understand it, in his two-day visit here. It's about highlighting the plight of refugees, but also the generosity of the Polish community who have allowed them to share their resources, their food, their shelters here in this country. Approximately 1.5 million Ukrainian refugees have resettled in Poland, according to the United Nations Refugee Agency, since February 2022, when that war began. Prince William also had a bilateral meeting with the Polish president, President Duda, and a spokesperson from Kensington Palace has now confirmed that the Polish president and the First Lady of Ukraine will be attending King Charles III's coronation in May. That is new information we've got this afternoon. But a majority of the meeting, I'm told, was about supporting the Polish people with their support for Ukraine, and also talking about the war in Ukraine, obviously, and the support and the impacts that has had on the Polish community being quite so close to the border. But the timing of this surprise visit is very significant because, of course, it comes the week that President Xi of China was on a state visit to Moscow at the invitation of Russian President Vladimir Putin. So perhaps British officials are hoping that Prince William's power of soft diplomacy, which he has shown here in Poland, is going to strengthen relationships between two NATO allies, Great Britain and Poland. And, of course, it is NATO, an organisation which President Putin perhaps will see as hostile, but I think to quite a lot of people in the world it's seen as a way of guaranteeing global security.
And indeed, we reflect on the links with Poland going back to the Second World War, of course, and all those Polish airmen that served with the RAF and the memorial that we have here in North London. But interesting, the phrase used, inspiring humanity, talking about what the Polish people were doing to help those Ukrainian refugees. But just to reiterate that breaking news, we do believe then that President Zelensky and the First Lady will be coming to the coronation.
President Duda, Mark. So the President of Poland, President Duda and the First Lady, they are going to be coming to the coronation, yes. That
I misheard.
Spokesperson for Kensington Palace following the meeting.
Yeah, and what happens now? Because obviously he's met British troops and American troops and Polish troops in terms of their very important role there next to Ukraine. And I think obviously he's meeting politicians as well. As you said, this is really soft diplomacy or soft power really on show.
It certainly is, Mark. I think yesterday's engagements was very much focused on meeting both Polish and British troops. He went to a town in the southeast of Poland, very close to the border with Ukraine. It's around an hour's drive. It's a city called Rzeszów, and that is seen, according to the Associated Press, as the gateway into Ukraine in terms of getting Western arms into Ukraine. And Prince William made a point of viewing some of that military equipment yesterday in Rzeszów with the British troops, which presumably is going to help Ukraine with their defence of their territory against the Russian invaders. And Prince William wanted to physically be there, I'm told, to thank both British and Polish troops for working together in support of Ukraine. So it was very much, yesterday was all about troops, and today is very much about the humanitarian side of things and shining a light on the refugee crisis, which is still going on.
Cameron in Warsaw, thank you very much indeed on updating us there on that very important visit. Thanks very much indeed. Prince of Wales there in Poland. Coming up, more reaction to that increase in the interest base rate up to 4.25%. But Bank of England saying things might start getting better in a few months' time. Let's hold on. What about the weather? Let's see if that's going to encourage us.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things. We've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat.
Did you know,
All
Kate
sorts of
Moss?
women. Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
And welcome back to GB News Live. Now, Albania's Prime Minister has hit out of what he saw the disgraceful way that migrants from his country had been singled out by the Home Secretary Suella Braverman and other UK ministers for political purposes, he said. Well, Edi Rama in Britain after talks with Rishi Sunak. He said the row which erupted at the end of last year marked a very low point in relations. But he believed there was now a will to overcome differences. Well, join us in the studio, our political reporter Olivia Utley, because it could be a bit awkward. I think it's at 4 o'clock this afternoon, the first face-to-face meeting at number 10.
Yeah, first face-to-face bilateral meeting, and it definitely is set to be quite awkward because Edi Rama has suggested that Suella Braverman's comments about Albanian criminals crossing the sea to come to Britain could be considered criminal in themselves. He's very angry. This has gone on for quite a long time now. We've seen it. We saw him hit out a couple of months ago about the characterisation of Albanian immigrants coming over to Britain as criminals, the accusation from the very top of British politics that these people are not genuine victims of modern slavery. They're simply exploiting our generous modern slavery laws to get into Britain. The fact that he says that the will is there, he's sounding warmer towards Rishi Sunak than he is towards Suella Braverman.
Who I take won't be at the meeting.
No, she won't be at the meeting.
Right.
Which it could be. Rishi Sunak has been showing himself this week to be quite a master of diplomacy, managing to get that Windsor framework deal through the House.
Statesmanlike, yeah.
Statesmanlike, exactly. And of course, agreeing the Windsor framework deal in the first place with the EU. So if Rishi Sunak, if this goes well, and there are signs, you know, the noises coming out of Albania aren't too negative about Sunak himself, he could be seen to snatch victory from the jaws of defeat.
Yeah, I mean, there are two other aspects to this, though, and that is, of course, the whole issue about asylum and what is going through in terms of the legislation at the moment. Because, of course, the point's been made, why claim asylum from Albania when it is a safe country? And therefore, the whole process of them coming over to claim asylum doesn't make sense. And additionally, as Mark White's been reporting to us, the Albanian people smuggling operation, which is a criminal, you know, that will have to be addressed by the Albanian leader at some stage.
Well, exactly. And Edi Rama's in quite a sticky situation, really, because his defence is that his argument for why what Suella Braverman's saying is disgraceful is that the people who are coming to Britain aren't coming simply to try and exploit our modern slavery laws. They're coming because they are in genuine need of refuge. Well, why are they in genuine need of refuge in his country? What are they fleeing from in Albania? Surely he wants to present Albania as a safe country that people wouldn't need to flee from.
Yeah.
So he is in quite an awkward situation himself. So it's not simply going to be the onus, but won't be entirely on Rishi Sunak and Suella Braverman. They have agreed a deal whereby Albanians who have exploited the rules will be sent back. So there is some sort of political relationship to work on.
We shall see what the mood music is at 4 o'clock in number 10. Olivia, for the moment, thank you very much indeed. Well, the mood music at Prime Minister's Questions discussions yesterday over the issue of crime was pretty fiery. But Keir Starmer has given another speech today at Stoke-on-Trent in which he's promised to halve the level of violence against women if Labour get into the power. Speaking about the damning Casey review once more to the Met Police, Labour leader quoting Margaret Thatcher, no less, agreeing with her that the rule of law was the first duty of government. Let's cross to Stoke-on-Trent and speak to our Deputy Political Editor, Tom Harwood. Sir Keir Starmer quotes Margaret Thatcher's shock. Tom.
Yes, this is clearly a pitch for winning over a certainly more socially conservative base of swing voters here in the Red Wall. Stoke-on-Trent used to be home to 3 Labour MPs, and yet as of 2019 and that big landslide election for Boris Johnson, it switched to 3 Conservative MPs. And clearly this is why Sir Keir Starmer has come here today to start talking about his second big national mission. We'll remember a couple of weeks ago, Sir Keir Starmer started talking about his first national mission on the economy and on growth. His second national mission is on crime and antisocial behaviour and conviction rates. And we've heard a lot about this today. So Keir Starmer says that he wants to halve the level of violent crime, half the level of knife crime, half the level of crime against women and girls, and hire 13,000 extra police officers. However, when I asked him about all of these very ambitious pledges, this extra resourcing, this extra funding, and frankly, this extra money, well, would there be any extra money? And Sir Keir Starmer told me that this money, particularly the big expenditure for the 13,000 extra police officers, wouldn't be new money at all. This, in the words of Keir Starmer, will be coming from efficiency savings within the police force currently. And that's a bit of a big question to raise, because in his speech today, Sir Keir spent a lot of time attacking the austerity that we endured under the coalition government, of course. All parties in the 2010 election, to a greater or lesser extent, promised to seek efficiency savings and reduce expenditure. But it's interesting to see that Sir Keir Starmer is trying to criticise that reduction in expenditure without saying that there would be new money on top. A curious balancing act.
Yep, and of course it's clear now that it's going to be one of the main battlegrounds for the election, tough on crime and, well, we remember the days, of course, of Tony Blair. For the moment, Tom, thank you very much for updating us, but let's get more reaction now with Rachel Williams, who's a domestic abuse survivor and campaigner at the Stand Up to Domestic Abuse group. Thank you very much indeed for joining us, Rachel. As we were saying, it really is now on the political agenda, it seems.
Well, that's great news. I mean, it's what we want to hear. It's what we've been wanting to hear for years, you know, but what is this going to look like? And I will say as well, you know, Keir needs really to be able to identify what a woman actually is, because I think he's having problems at the moment identifying what a woman is. So it's all very well and good him, you know, giving us lip service, but there's far more that we want done as survivors and victims of domestic abuse and violence.
Do you think, though, he does have some expertise, having been a former director of public prosecutions, to realise what needs to be done and where?
I think he does, yeah. And I can remember being in Parliament quite a few years ago, and it was the London's Victims Commissioner. She was talking about her case where she was being stalked. And I mean, he was saying all the right things that, you know, somebody would be saying with knowledge of domestic abuse and violence and stalking. So, you know, and I think he's got a great team around him. You've got some really good MPs, you know, Jess Phillips, who I know really well, Heaton-Harris, who I know really well, and also Rosie Duffield. But I would like to see more support for Rosie Duffield and what she's saying about domestic abuse and violence and safe spaces.
OK, well, thank you, Rachel, for your analysis on that. Sorry we've got to cut it short, but we're nearly at the end of the hour. Thank you very much indeed. More to come in the next hour after that interest rate decision. Jeremy Hunt, the Chancellor, saying we support the Bank of England's actions today and we will continue to play our part in the fight by being responsible with the public finances. How are your finances? We'll be finding out with your comments too. Stay with us here on GB News Live.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Deebs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even some ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's 1 o'clock. You're with GB News Live with me, Mark Longhurst, and coming up for you this lunchtime. Ever higher, but will they now stop? The Bank of England increasing the base rate for the 11th time, despite predictions it could stay the same. It's at 4.25%. What does that mean for you? And we're talking to a company providing the cost of living advice as well. Also talking about Boris Johnson. Could he be now fighting for his political future after this grilling at the Partygate inquiry yesterday? He said there was not a shred of evidence that showed he had misled MPs, but if a 10-day suspension is voted through, it could trigger a by-election for his seat. And the latest, as Nicola Sturgeon says bye-bye. She's delivered a farewell speech during FMQs today, stepping down as the First Minister of Scotland and the leader of the Scottish National Party. What now for them? But before that, latest news headlines coming up with Rhiannon.
Thank you, Mark. Good afternoon. It's 1 minute past 1, your top stories from the GB newsroom. The Bank of England's raised the interest rates for an 11th consecutive time from 4% to 4.25%. It's in a bid to slow down the rising cost of living and comes after a surprise rise in inflation, as well as a decision by the US Federal Reserve to raise its key rate. The central bank's also announced it expects the economy to grow slightly in the second quarter, revising a previous forecast it would contract. Junior doctors in England will strike for 4 days between April the 11th and April the 15th. The British Medical Association's accusing the government of not being serious about resolving the pay dispute and says Health Secretary Steve Barclay has failed to make a credible offer. The union says the new round of strikes comes with great frustration, but that they'll not stop until they're paid what they're worth. The UK and Welsh governments have announced 2 free ports will be created in Wales for the first time in a bid to boost the country's economy. The Celtic and Anglesey free ports in North Wales are expected to attract almost £5 billion in investment. It's also hoped they'll generate up to 20,000 jobs by the end of the decade. Rishi Sunak says the free ports will see communities across Wales go from strength to strength.
Billions of pounds of investment, tens of thousands of jobs created across Wales. And it's a great example of the UK government and the Welsh government working together to drive growth. That's one of the 5 priorities I set out at the beginning of the year, to grow the economy. These free ports will help us deliver on that.
Sir Keir Starmer's promised to make Britain's streets safe again if Labour wins the next general election. He's pledged 4 targets to modernise British policing in England and Wales in the next 10 years. They include halving levels of violence against women and girls and knife crime. It's after the Conservatives accused Labour of being soft on crime. Sir Keir also announced his party's plan to raise confidence in the police following the damning report into the Met.
Confidence is everything. It's what effective, visible, open-minded policing can provide for the communities that it serves. And as we've seen this week, it's what bad policing destroys. So let me be very clear, the next Labour government will modernise British policing.
Sir Keir also said he'll aim to publish his tax returns later today. That's after the Prime Minister published his yesterday. Rishi Sunak's accounts show he paid more than £1 million in tax over the last 3 years. A Nigerian politician has been found guilty of an organ harvesting plot involving a UK hospital. The senator, his wife and a doctor were found guilty of conspiring to arrange the travel of a man to exploit him for his kidney. The man was brought to the UK last year to provide a transplant to Ike Ekweremadu's daughter for an £80,000 private transplant. The case, heard at the Old Bailey, is a legal first. A 28-year-old man has appeared in court charged with 2 counts of attempted murder after 2 elderly men were set alight outside mosques in Birmingham and London. Mohammed Abkar is alleged to have sprayed the 2 victims before setting them alight in separate incidents. 70-year-old Mohammed Rayaz remains in hospital with severe burns to his face, hands and chest following Monday's attack in Birmingham. Nicola Sturgeon says it's been a profound honour as she faced her first Minister's questions after more than 8 years as head of the Scottish Government. She announced last month that she was stepping down from her role, saying she no longer had the stamina to carry on in the pressured and demanding role. The First Minister said she'd remain in office until her successor is chosen. The Prince of Wales has laid a wreath at the tomb of the unknown soldier in Warsaw. On the second day of his surprise visit to Poland, Prince William spoke with Ukrainian refugees and paid tribute to the inspiring humanity of the Polish people. He says the trip has allowed him to thank troops and underline his support for Poland. And Sir Jim Ratcliffe and Sheikh Jassim are both expected to submit second improved bids to buy Manchester United after the deadline was extended. A cut-off of 9 p.m. last night had initially been set for the Ineos owner and Qatari banker, the only bidders to have gone public. A first round of bidding took place last month, and it's understood there are as many as 8 other potential investors. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now, though, it's back to Mark.
Rhiannon, thank you very much indeed. So, Quote, with rising prices strangling growth and eroding family budgets, the sooner we grip inflation, the better for everyone. Who said that? Well, the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, reacting to the Bank of England's decision to raise interest rates for the 11th consecutive time, but this time only by 0.25% to 4.25%. Let's get the latest live outside the Bank of England now. Our business and economics editor, Liam Halligan, has been going through the various numbers, and not just the rate itself, of course, Liam, it's what the Bank of England has been saying about the economy in these months ahead.
The Bank of England's really changed its tune in recent months, even recent weeks, Mark. It was predicting 5 successive quarters of economic contraction, a long recession lasting for the whole of 2023 and into 2024. It's now saying that won't happen. It's now taken its cue from the Office of Budget Responsibility, which, of course, in Jeremy Hunt's recent budget said that the UK would avoid recession. But let's just think about this interest rate rise that we've just heard about. If you put it in historic context, I've got a graph here to show you. From 2017 onwards, the Bank of England was very gradually raising interest rates to about 1%. They then went back down to 0% when we had the shock of lockdown. And since then, we've had 11 successive interest rate rises in 18 months as inflation has really taken hold, not least since the war in Ukraine. So interest rates are now at a 15-year high mark, the highest since the 2008 financial crisis. And this 0.25% increase in interest rates, a family with a mortgage of £200,000, if they're on a variable rate, this will add around £350 a year to their mortgage payments. Just that increase in interest rates today. That's a pretty chunky hit in the family budget of most households in this country. Savers, they should get a bit more on their savings, though you might have to get onto your bank to get that increase in savings because they don't always like passing on those interest rate increases.
And a lot of people will be doing their numbers, but also scratching their heads a little bit because we had this shock inflation figure coming out at 10.4%, which many economists were taken by surprise by. And now we've got the bank saying, well, actually, we expect inflation now to really drop off quite dramatically. The two don't seem to marry, some people may think.
It's because economic data, by definition, is backward-looking. That 10.4% rise in inflation that we had, the February number which came out earlier this week, it was a surprise. It was up from 10.1. Most people thought we'd go into single-digit inflation below 10%, but it didn't happen. That reflects the fact that this time last year was the time when the war in Ukraine began. It was the spike in prices when you had energy prices go up, when you had the price of fertilizer go up, food costs going up. I do think the March inflation number, when it comes out, will be considerably lower. And also, over recent weeks, wholesale energy prices have fallen quite steeply, Mark. The prices of gas and electricity on wholesale markets that the energy providers then buy and sell on to us. So I do think the Bank of England's right. Inflation will fall quite sharply, I'd say to around 4 or 5% from its current 10.4% by the end of the year. It's very, very complicated for people to get their heads around, but the general message here is that the economy is gradually improving. I do think this is the final rise in interest rates from the Bank of England. They'll keep warning about more interest rate rises, even if they don't go through them, because they want to keep a lid on what we call inflation expectations, keep wage claims lower if they can. But for my money, this is the last one. So pain for some households today if they've got mortgages, but if they can weather this storm, then I think there is sight of a safe port on the horizon.
Now, the other aspect, the other part of the picture, Liam, is what's happened with these banks and the bank shares. And Anna Leach, who's Deputy Chief Economist at the CBI, indicating this is why it was very tricky for the bank today, of course, because a lot of these bank problems being blamed on the higher interest rates, which means that basically their bonds are worth less effectively. Has that settled down a bit? I know the bank shares are still really not doing that well, but have they sort of weathered the storm to a degree?
Well, we've been talking in recent days, haven't we, Mark, about the Bank of England being on the horns of a really tough dilemma, because on the one hand, inflation went up, so they have to be seen to respond to that by raising interest rates. On the other hand, if they do raise interest rates, as you just explained there, that makes life tougher for banks that hold lots of government bonds. The value of those bonds goes down, the price of them goes down when interest rates rise. That makes their balance sheet look weaker. It makes the bank's loans and other investments look riskier. It means investors in the banks, the creditors of the banks, the people that lend the banks money, they get concerned, and that's what's been happening. We saw the collapse of Silicon Valley Bank, of course, in the States and its UK subsidiary taken over by HSBC, but then much bigger news, the failure of a globally systemic bank, Credit Suisse, one of the top 30 banks in the world. That's now merged with UBS. That combined bank is so big, it's bigger than the whole economy of Switzerland. So there, in my view, there are systemic dangers going forward. But look, in general, it's very difficult to know about the banking sector. It's very difficult to understand what's really on their balance sheet. The authorities are always going to say, until it's completely obvious that it's not the case, that the banking sector is safe. I am reassured by the fact that financial markets have calmed down. I am reassured by the fact that the price of some bank shares have started to recover.
Yeah.
Once a major bank like Credit Suisse has failed, then the markets are going to be jittery for a long time to come. And that's another reason, Mark, in my view, why this is the final interest rate rise from the Bank of England.
Liam, at the bank, thank you very much indeed for taking us through all those figures and, of course, that announcement that we had at 12 noon. Well, let's get more reaction now. Joining us, Greg Marsh, who's the founder of Nous, which is a company providing cost of living advice. And, Greg, I wonder what your sums are in terms of what's coming ahead, with the bank indicating in its view that inflation is likely to fall significantly in the third quarter, even further than economists had previously forecast. They seem pretty cheery. Are you?
Well, let's hope they're right. I'm a little more cautious because, unfortunately, the Bank of England's track record on forecasting has been a little on the optimistic side. You'll recall they were slow to catch up with how severe the problems were going to be after that disastrous mini-budget last autumn. And clearly, I don't want to claim that they are in a sort of playing a cynical game, but clearly they're under political pressure from the government to talk down the risk of high inflation, because if inflation expectations are high, it's more likely that inflation expectations get baked in and price rises still increase further and interest and earnings increase more. So look, it's in their interest to talk down the risks and to talk up the good story. Unfortunately for households, even if inflation does fall as fast as these latest expectations are this prediction, that doesn't mean prices are going to fall. Right? So even if inflation falls, that means that the rate at which prices are increasing starts to fall, but prices themselves will continue to go up, and they are already at astonishingly high levels for a lot of households. And today's interest rate announcement is also bad news for UK households, right? Particularly those 1.4 million UK households with a mortgage that's due for renewal over the next 12 months. They're going to face a typical increase of probably £300, £350 a year on their interest rate charges. So, yeah, look, it's good news if inflation falls. It's not a silver bullet, and there's still a lot of hardship out there at the moment, particularly for those with interest rate debt.
Yeah, and no indication that wages, either in the private or indeed the public sector, are keeping pace with the inflation rise, or indeed the interest rate rise, in terms of what people have got in their pockets at the end of the month, if anything. And interesting that two members of the Monetary Policy Committee arguing against, or voting against the rise, saying, you know, that the increases of interest rates so far have not actually filtered through to what they call the real economy.
Well, this is the strange effect that, and even this inflation number, right, that it hides a multitude of sins. Food inflation, far from being that 10.4% that was reconfirmed earlier this week from the Office of National Statistics, food inflation is around 18%. So the costs of many food staples have almost doubled over the last 2 years. It's an astonishing increase, which hits everyone in their pocket. We know that the costs of energy, which is an absolute essential for every household, has increased dramatically. We're 2.5 times more expensive now than it was in 2020. So even when we're looking at headline numbers coming down, the reality on the ground, exactly as you say, is a very mixed picture. And it's particularly households on lower incomes for whom a larger proportion of their income is absorbed by essentials like food, like energy prices, that are faced a much tougher time and are facing a much tougher time. And so I think there's a lot of subtlety in looking into the detail. You've got to go under the skin of this to get the hang of it, and you've got to look at your household's finances on a case-by-case basis. Our advice to householders is do your sums, get to understand, use the free tools like Nous that are out there, understand really what these kinds of changes mean for you, for your mortgage if you have one, for the costs of things like food and fuel, and make sure you're on top of those details, because otherwise, you're going to get a lot more shocks over the course of this year before potentially the good news drips through.
Yeah, don't stick your head in the sand. However, I mean, the bank is pointing up, particularly on the energy aspect, that this decision to keep the support for energy bills and the fact that obviously energy in the wholesale market is still falling, that may well help all households.
Yeah, there is potentially some good news coming. We've, of course, in the budget last week, we saw that the government was going to cap that energy price guarantee at the current level. So we're not expecting energy bills to rise for a typical household next month. And most analysts are now expecting that because of those falls in the wholesale price, that the energy price cap set by Ofgem will also start to fall, and potentially even to the level of £2,000 rather than current £2,500 by the second half of this year, potentially even below £2,000 by the end of this year. So good news, but again, context matters. If energy bills were to fall to around £2,000 per year for an average household by the end of this year, that would still mean they were around twice what they were 24 months ago. So it still represents a very significant real terms increase in costs for most households, even if there might be some good news on the horizon.
Without significant real terms increases in wages, of course. Greg, thank you very much indeed for your analysis, and we'll see, of course, how these things progress or otherwise in the months ahead. Now, is Boris Johnson fighting for his political future, or indeed has the man that David Cameron described as the greased piglet escaped once again? Of course, it follows yesterday's MP's investigation into the Partygate issue, the Privileges Committee, some denouncing the flimsy assurances that they'd been based on, the former Prime Minister insisting there was not a shred of evidence, he said, to show that he'd lied to MPs, saying it would be utterly insane for him to have misled Parliament. Well, if the proposal for a 10-day suspension is voted for by the MPs, a by-election in Mr Johnson's seat could be triggered, potentially spelling the end of his parliamentary career, at least. Let's get now the views of Nigel Nelson, political editor at the Sunday Mirror and Sunday People. Nigel, your votes of the Boris Johnson show, should he be returning for another week?
I think the important thing here is that while select committees are a quasi-judicial process, they're not actually courts of law, which means that politics will come into play here. So my impression from the committee yesterday is that they might find Boris Johnson not guilty of the more serious charge of deliberately misleading Parliament, but they might get him on recklessly misleading Parliament. Now, what that would end up meaning is that the kind of penalty for that would be anything from an apology to the House of Commons itself, even a written apology, or even they could expel him. But what they might do is go for a suspension, say 5 days, 7 days, something like that, which will be below the 10 days that would trigger the recall petition that might lead to the end of his career.
OK, so a mitigation in terms of the sentencing, if you like, even though, as you say, it's not a court of law. And would that be pointed up by the fact that Sir Bernard Jenkin, senior Tory, was pretty forensic in his questioning on the issue of proper advice? And obviously that would tie into this area of being reckless.
Yes, absolutely. So what you ended up with, I thought, yesterday was that there was no evidence that Boris Johnson was actually told that rules and guidelines had been broken. But equally, there was some evidence that he was never told that he was never told that they hadn't been broken. So then to go to Parliament and give assurances that everything was fine obviously puts him in a slightly tricky situation. But that means that he was behaving recklessly rather than knowingly.
And in terms of the 10-day suspension and his political future, is that actually academic anyway, given the fact that he had this call to arms, if you like, yesterday on the Windsor Protocol, saying he was voting against, Liz Truss saying the same, and yet, the 22 Tories who voted against was not exactly a rebellion. I mean, has his political capital been spent now?
Yes, I think it probably has. That there is still, you can never say never in politics. So there's always a remote possibility that Boris Johnson can make a comeback. But I do think it's highly unlikely now. And that vote yesterday was indicative of that. His support really has melted away. I reckon there are probably about 20 hardcore supporters in the House of Commons for Boris Johnson, but that's it. The majority of Tory MPs now want to move on. They know that another leadership contest would be an absolute disaster for them, with an election probably towards the end of next year. So I think that as far as any idea that Boris Johnson might one day lead the Tory party again or even become Prime Minister, that's now for the birds.
OK, Nigel, thank you for that assessment. I think we got your voting in. We'll see, of course, what happens when the committee actually decides what sanction or otherwise is decided. Thank you very much. Coming up here on GB News Live, we'll be talking to an Albanian MP because the Albanian Prime Minister is heading to number 10 after comments that he said Suella Braverman's description of migrants was disgraceful. Could be an awkward time at number 10. We'll be updating you on that. Let's see what the weather's got for us.
Hello, I'm Alex Deakin, and this is your latest weather forecast from the Met Office. A blustery, boisterous day out there. Gusty winds bringing in plenty of heavy showers. Between the downpours, there will be some sunshine, but nowhere immune from the downpours. This area of low pressure is responsible. There's also a little wiggle of a waving weather front just pushing up from the south. That will bring some more persistent rain later across southern areas, certainly increasing the cloud through the afternoon here. So any sunny spells will be fairly hazy. Then lots of showers for Northern Ireland, Northern England, North Wales. A thunderstorm is possible. Not as many showers over northern Scotland, although the Northern Isles likely to stay fairly cloudy with some outbreaks of rain. The wind's a little lighter in the north as well, but elsewhere it's a blustery, gusty day. But it is quite mild. Temperatures could still reach 14 or 15 Celsius when the sun is out. We'll see a bit more in the way of rain coming into southern counties through this evening. May get into the Midlands for a time, that more persistent rain before clearing its way through East Anglia. And then we're back to more showers later in the night, chiefly for Scotland, Northern Ireland and Northern England, with southern areas becoming dry and clear. A bit of a fresher night, but still temperatures mostly staying in mid-single figures. On to Friday's details, and again, it's a case of sunshine and showers. Quite a bit of sunshine early on over the Midlands and Eastern England. Generally dry start here, but there'll be showers elsewhere. Slow-moving showers across northern parts. Further south, the showers will brush through fairly rapidly on a stiff and gusty wind. Again, between the showers, the sun will pop out, and that'll lift the temperatures into the teens in the south, 10 to 12 further north. The showery weather will continue during Friday evening. Notice the circulation here. That's where the low pressure is moving to, bringing lots of showers on Friday night across Northern Ireland and Western Scotland. But as that low starts to pull away, it does look a little drier as we go through the weekend. Certainly Sunday drier than Saturday, and it's also going to turn colder.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now, let's just update you on what the Bank of England's been doing. It's pushed the interest rate, the base rate, up again, another 0.25% to 4.25%. Bit more reaction coming in, this time from a debt help charity Step Change, saying that 17% of its new clients already in arrears with their mortgage. Peter Tutton, the head of policy there, saying this another rate rise is the latest in a succession of body blows to household finances, adding that it's essential that you contact your lender or speak to a debt-free advice charity, saying that it will at least add £24 a month on additional costs after the latest increase. In overall, £284 increase over the year in terms of a tracker mortgage. So that's the pain that's being felt. More reaction coming up to it. But let's reflect that we got Albania's Prime Minister at number 10 this afternoon, about 4 o'clock. And he's hit out at the disgraceful way that migrants from his country have been singled out by the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, and other UK ministers for political purposes. Well, Edi Rama's in Britain for the first face-to-face talks with Rishi Sunak. The row, he said, which erupted at the end of last year, marked a very low point in relations between the two countries, but that he believed there would now be a will to overcome those differences. Let's speak now to Jarida Tabak, who's a member of Parliament for the Democratic Party of Albania, who can join us there in Brussels. Thank you very much indeed for your time, Jarida. How deeply has this been felt in Albania itself?
Thank you very much, Mark. I am here in Brussels today because I also chair the European Integration Committee in the Albanian Parliament, and also the issue of immigrants and discussions around the issue in UK are appearing here in Brussels. Let me tell you that I have been studying in UK, and as an Albanian, I felt really threatened by her comments. And as a politician, I felt sorry that the amazing Albanian community was singled out, was attacked, was bullied, only because there was a problem. And we have to acknowledge that there was a problem which has to be dealt both ways. In UK, with the system that exists there, but also in Albania, because there is a problem in our country because people are leaving. And the high rate of people leaving the country should, of course, make Albanian politics understand that we should also deal with it internally and not only leave the fault in your side.
Yeah. Well, could it be, though, that perhaps it was taken in the wrong way and that she was referring to a degree to the people smuggling gangs, those who operate the routes across Europe to get people into the small boats then across the Channel?
This discussion has been going on for months. It's not lately. And she has been repeating this several times. It is true that there are Albanians that are linked with organized crime and with bands. But they are a minority of a minority. The majority of Albanians there is a huge community of 200,000 Albanians are doing pretty well. We have amazing students there. We have business owners, entrepreneurs, which represent the better face of Albania. The minority of minority that is linked with criminal bands does not represent the best of our country. And I believe her comments were repeated several times. And I was happy to see that also the British Prime Minister did actually say that he was sorry that this was taken as a case. And secondly, people that are brought to safe places, I understand, hotels and community centers, in this case also Albanians, are also having problems with kids which are kidnapped at those centers and are being used again by the bands. Half of those kids are Albanian. This is a problem clearly linked with UK and not with Albania. Albania has its own problems. I am in opposition, and There is a huge list of problems that I can mention to
But
you. We have problem. Yes.
Yeah, I was going to say, this comes to a very important point, of course, and that is the issue of those Albanians claiming asylum here in Britain, where the British authorities are saying we don't understand why, when we accept Albania as being a democratic, stable and economically advanced part of Europe.
Albania is having its own problems in terms of democracy, in terms of rule of law, in terms of corruption. But that's a totally different issue with the issue that UK is dealing. I believe that we had this problem years ago with Germany. We had this problem, and then Germany changed approach. They considered Albania as a safe country, and immediately whoever went to Germany was returned back to Albania.
Yeah.
In this case, our internal problems, which are recognized by everyone, by international reports and by Brussels here, but also by UK reports, are of course not linked with the system that you have there, and are not linked with the filters that your system has there. Albania has having a higher rate of emigration right now. Of course, because of our internal things. But the way they are treated in UK, of course, it's not up to us.
And do you think that the relationship will be reset this afternoon? It's the first face-to-face meeting between your Prime Minister and Rishi Sunak.
So I don't know what will happen in the meeting. Of course, obviously, I'm in opposition, but let me tell you that Albania and UK have much more stronger links than those discussed during the last 6 months. Links related with culture, with human relations, with business relations, that nothing can destroy. The statements of a minister who now is a minister and some months later will not be a minister, considering also some lack of stability there, I believe that are not going to ruin our wonderful relations. UK is a country I love. I've studied there, and I believe that it's a huge potential to further the links between Albania and UK.
Jarida Tabaku, thank you very much for joining us in Brussels.
Thank you, Mark.
Apologies for the signal breaking up, but we managed to hear you right the way through, which was great. Thank you very much for your time. More to come, of course, as the Prime Minister, Albanian Prime Minister, visits 4 o'clock at number 10. We'll have that for you later. Let's get an update now on the news headlines with Rhiannon.
It's 1:34, your top stories from the GB newsroom. The Bank of England's raised the interest rate for an 11th consecutive time from 4% to 4.25%. It's in a bid to slow down the rising cost of living and comes after a surprise rise in inflation, as well as a decision by the US Federal Reserve to raise its key rate. The central bank's also announced it expects the economy to grow slightly in the second quarter, revising a previous forecast it would contract. Junior doctors in England will strike for 4 days between April the 11th and 15th. The British Medical Association has accused the government of not being serious about resolving the pay dispute and says Health Secretary Steve Barclay has failed to make a credible offer. The union says the new round of strikes come with great frustration, but won't stop until they're paid what they're worth. The UK and Welsh governments have announced 2 freeports will be created in Wales for the first time in a bid to boost the country's economy. The Celtic and Anglesey freeports in North Wales are expected to attract almost £5 billion in investment. It's also hoped they'll generate up to 20,000 jobs by the end of the decade. And Nicola Sturgeon says it's been a profound honour as she faced her final First Minister's questions after more than 8 years as head of the Scottish Government. She announced last month she was stepping down, saying she no longer had the stamina to carry on in the pressured and demanding role. The First Minister said she'd remain in office until her successor is chosen.
The First Minister has been variously, often all at once, challenging, exhilarating and exhausting. But every single day, without exception, it has been an utter privilege.
TV, DAB, digital radio, tune in and online. This is GB News. Don't go anywhere. Mark, we're back in just a moment.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, no, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
And welcome back to GB News Live. Now, the trial of Thomas Cashman, who's accused of the murder of 9-year-old Olivia Pratt-Corbell, continues today. Cashman, who's 34 years old, denies all charges against him. Our reporter Sophie Reaper's outside Manchester Crown Court with the latest. Sophie, what has the jury heard today?
Well, this is now day 14 of this Thomas Cashman trial here at Manchester Crown Court, where today the prosecution has continued their cross-examination of the defendant. David McLaughlin, KC, continued to question Mr. Cashman about his movements ahead of the shooting, which took place in August of last year. Now, the prosecution alleges that Mr. Cashman made several journeys that day in order to scope out the location of Joseph Nee, whom we now know was the intended victim of the gunman. Thomas Cashman disputes this, though. He says that the routes he took that day were just routes he's taken his entire life. He says he wasn't paying attention to whether Joseph Nee was in view or not. He said, I wasn't looking for Joseph Nee. I wasn't thinking about Joseph Nee once that day. They then moved on to Mr. Cashman's movements later that evening, less than 2 hours before the shooting took place. Mr. McLaughlin asked him if at that point he was starting to get excited. Mr. Cashman told him no. He then asked Mr. Cashman if he was starting to get into the murder frame of mind, to which the defendant once again replied no. Now, court has taken a short break, but we're expecting it to resume once again this afternoon, so we'll be bringing you all the latest updates a little bit later on.
Olivia, thank you very much indeed for that. Now, a 28-year-old man has been charged with 2 counts of attempted murder after 2 elderly men were set alight in incidents in both Birmingham and London. Let's go live now to Birmingham Magistrates Court. Our reporter Jack Carson is there. And what have we heard at that particular court, Jack?
Well, today here at Birmingham Magistrates Court, 28-year-old Mohammed Abkur is alleged appeared today simply to enter his name, address and date of birth. He is alleged, of course, to have sprayed a substance on 2 men and set them both alight. Separate incidences, of course. One of them he's alleged to have done on Monday, when we know that 70-year-old Mohammed Rayaz was set alight walking back from his mosque on Dudley Road around 7 p.m. on Monday night, and the other in London on the 27th of February, when an 82-year-old man also walking back from the mosque was also set alight. There was no indication from his solicitor today of a plea, but he is going to enter a plea at Birmingham Crown Court on the 20th of April. He's been remanded and stays in custody until the 21st of September, and the judge here today said that there is an expectation of a trial to take place before that. So that is the latest here from Birmingham Crown Court. Of course, this investigation between the West Midlands Police and the Metropolitan Police has also involved counter-terrorism units as well. They were involved from Tuesday, and yesterday, after being initially arrested on the charge of attempted murder, Mr. Abkar was also arrested for the attempted murder of the man in London on February the 27th. He appears at Birmingham Crown Court on the 20th of April.
Jack, thank you very much for updating us with that procedure there at Birmingham, and more, of course, from the courts as those hearings take place. Now, let's reflect earlier that we had the decision by the Bank of England on the base rate, interest rates, up another 0.25%, bringing it up to 4.25%. It follows the earlier resurgence of inflation, with that 10.4% official figure coming through earlier in the week. Well, our news reporter in the west of England, Jeff Moody, has been speaking to people at the South Molton Market in Devon to get their reaction.
Well, yes, I've been here in South Molton Pannier Market all morning, talking to the stallholders and customers about how they're reacting to this rise in interest rates. I've been trying to get a viewpoint from somebody who has something positive to say about the rise in interest rates, and I've found it. You have something positive to say, don't you, sir?
I do, actually, yes. I'm town clerk of South Molton Town Council. I'm in charge of the finances. Now, the interest rate rises for the council are actually a very good thing. We don't borrow any money, but we've sold some land and sold some of our assets off. We've actually got some surplus cash. So obviously I invest those in bonds, and we've been getting 0.1% over the last 2 or 3 years. Now I'm getting about 2.53%, which is great because it's quite substantial, our savings, and it actually brings in a lot of income to the council. So this is a really positive slant on it, from the council's point of view only, obviously.
And what do you do with that money?
We can invest it in the town, invest it in the Pannier Market. It just gives us more cash. Because obviously, we're finding things difficult with the electricity. We've got electricity here in all our buildings, etc. So it's just good to have some extra income apart from council tax, which is where we get most of our income from. So a real positive note for once on it.
Good. I'm very pleased to hear that. And talking of positive notes, the market here has done incredibly well, hasn't it, at a very difficult time?
Absolutely. It's quite incredible, really. And people are actually spending money. In here, we're getting a lot of footfall, especially since we came first, as you know, in the whole of the UK.
Just explain first in what?
The parish community markets. So it's all the markets in the UK, the parish markets and council markets. We came first, which is fantastic, absolutely brilliant. But yes, I'm amazed at what people. I think if people like the market, if they like where they're going, and they like the goods that are being sold, they're going to pay money for it and actually spend some money, which is happening here.
And from a stallholder's point of view, their overheads are a lot less, aren't they? Because they don't have premises.
Just the market fee, pitch fee, and that's it, really. So, yeah, obviously they got the travelling, which obviously put their overheads up a bit. Not all of them are that local. Some do come from Bude and places like that. So, it all adds up for them. So they need the good takings.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much indeed for talking to me. Well, there you go. Something positive. Somebody that believes that this rise in interest rates is a good thing. Back to you.
Well, reaction there from Devon. Apologies for the low sound level, but of course South Molton is quite far away. Nicola Sturgeon has faced her final First Minister's questions today after more than 8 years at the head of the Scottish Government. The leader of the SNP announcing last month that she was to step down for her role at that press conference in Edinburgh. She said then she no longer had the stamina to carry on in what was a pressured and demanding role. Well, just a short while ago, she gave her heartfelt goodbye to last First Minister's questions to thank the people of Scotland for the privilege of a lifetime, she said. This was the standing ovation that followed.
And it is now to the people of Scotland, all of you, whether you voted for me or not, that I reserve my final words from this seat. Thank you so much for placing your trust in me. Words will never adequately convey the gratitude and the awe I hold in my heart for the opportunity I have had to serve as your First Minister. It truly has been the privilege of my lifetime. And with these words, Presiding Officer, I draw it to a close.
And that was the ovation from, of course, all political sides there at Holyrood. But let's get more now with our Scotland reporter, Tony Maguire, who joins us, because the other issue, of course, Tony, as the party tries to vote in a new leader is, well, the wheels have come off a little bit for the SNP.
Yes, certainly. It's been a tough week for the SNP, certainly with 3 quite high-level resignations over last weekend. Today, you know, there were questions very much about whether Scottish Labour, Scottish Conservatives were going to go all in, as per usual, on this Nicola Sturgeon's 286th First Minister's questions, and they did. And certainly with party figures being at the core of Douglas Ross's attack this week, as per usual, quickly put in his place by Nicola Sturgeon, asking him to reveal Scottish Conservative party membership numbers, which Mr Ross declined to do. But certainly the first seemed quite by the by. A lot of talk about legacy. Obviously the opposition quite keen to paint a bad picture about the NHS, a bad picture about the economy. But Nicola Sturgeon, in 8 years, 8 elections and 8 victories, putting them in a solid position and certainly at the forefront of Scottish politics. So I think that Nicola Sturgeon, when she took to the podium at 1:45 today for her 10-minute send-off, it was quite emotional. We've seen a lot of emotion from Nicola Sturgeon in the last month. Certainly, more than ever, it's quite obvious that this was the time for her to step down after a difficult few months, especially over gender reform, which of course lost the party 12,000 more members. But certainly today, a lot of thanks going to a lot of different departments under her across Scotland and across the chamber as well, resulting in the lesser spotted and probably never uttered again pleasantries from Douglas Ross, who had nothing but nice things to say after 5-1 today. But it was a nice moment, a good moment in history, and I think a lot of people will be dissecting that hour for days to come.
Nice things to say. Well, that makes a change anyway for the moment, as, of course, on our last day. Tony, for the moment, thank you very much indeed for that. But let's now get the views of Brian Monteith, former member of the Scottish Parliament, joining us. And I'm just looking at her comments there at First Minister's questions. Thanking Scotland or the Scots for placing your trust in me. Question is now, does the country still have its trust in the SNP after the events of the past week or so?
Well, it's hard to say at the moment. Certainly polling suggests that the support is falling much below where it was before. But it will really be up to whoever replaces Nicola Sturgeon to try and rebuild a reputation that will keep them ahead of the Conservative and Labour parties, who are the main opposition. And it's hard to say until next Monday what that will mean, because it's certainly unclear who will win the support of the party membership. And there is a clear difference between the route that those that might win it will take, and we can't second guess the outcome.
And of course, there are questions about the membership, how many people are actually part of the SNP, questions about its financing and so on, all those to be addressed. But what do we think about what Nicola Sturgeon will be doing now? I mean, she's acknowledged, I think, to MSPs that she'd made a fair share of mistakes in the last 8 years. Of course, there are things I wish I'd done better or differently. Do we think we'll get the biography now, or the autobiography?
Well, the best political biographies are the ones that actually shed some real light and real truth as to how decisions were taken, who tried to prevent decisions being taken, and who helped. It remains to be seen whether Nicola Sturgeon would do anything close to an honest account of what running the Scottish government was in her efforts to get independence. After all, she's a leader who politicised the COVID pandemic. She's a leader who failed in her domestic agenda, but most importantly to the SNP followers, she failed to deliver independence. So while it might make revealing reading, particularly for her critics, it will be very hard reading for her supporters.
A bit of interference on the signal, Brian, so we'll leave it there. But thank you very much indeed for your assessment on that views. And, of course, we'll see what happens in terms of the voting going ahead for both leading the party and to become First Minister. Now, let's just reflect some more reaction coming in after Boris Johnson's appearance at the Privileges Committee yesterday. The Commons leader Penny Mordaunt has suggested that critics of the committee might have been too full of bants. BANTZ, close quotes. To help us analyse what that actually means, Olivia's joined us. Too full of bands. What the heck is she on about?
I think she means it might have been too flippant.
I see. Right, OK.
And I think that was probably referring to some of those incidents where Boris Johnson said, for example, that when asked what mitigations were in place to keep the people at these events safe from COVID, he suggested that they didn't use each other's pens. Although he said, of course, we did pass drinks to each other.
Right. And the cake wasn't eaten, it was still in the box.
And the cake wasn't eaten, it was gobbled up by his private
However, I mean,
secretary
we've also got Jacob Rees-Mogg talking about, he's doing very well against the marsupials. But this is deadly serious because the whole issue, of course, is bringing Parliament into contempt. Now, a lot of the analysts and commentators we've spoken to seem to indicate that the way that it's going is this question of being reckless, which may not mean the full sanction of 10 days suspension and therefore him losing his seat effectively.
Yes, so from what I made of it was that Boris was on pretty firm ground when he was talking about when he was rebutting the case that the committee had built up, that it should have been obvious to him that he'd misled Parliament. He essentially said, well, if it was so obvious, then why was there an official number 10 photographer there? Who would have invited an official number 10 photographer to an event which was clearly breaking the rules? He also suggested that he lumped himself in with all the civil servants, and he mentioned the current Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, bit of a dig there, but essentially was saying, well, if it wasn't obvious to them, then why should it have been obvious to me?
Yeah.
And he was also sounded like he was on quite firm ground when he said that he was given advice by his advisors that it hadn't broken the rules. He stood up and relayed that advice. So I think trying to make a strong case that he knowingly misled Parliament might be difficult. But he was on much shakier ground, Boris was on shakier ground, when he was asked why he didn't set the record straight when it had become clear that what he was saying was a mistruth.
And we reflect it's a senior Tory backbencher, Sir Bernard Jenkins, who is forensically examining and pushing him on this, particularly why did you fail to take proper advice, i.e. why didn't you have wider advice, why didn't you have more experts telling you what was right and what was wrong?
Absolutely, because his assurance that he wasn't breaking any rules seems to have been got from his political advisors, so relatively junior press secretaries, essentially. And the committee seemed to sort of accept his assertion that in the heat of the moment he had to rely on the most senior people around, and that was these Jack Doyle and another senior press secretary. But they then asked, well, after you'd made the statement, surely it was your duty to sort of copper plate it, to make absolutely sure, belt and braces, that you were telling 100% the truth to Parliament. So why didn't you go and speak to a parliamentary lawyer about it, for example, to make sure that you were telling the truth?
And there was a lawyer sitting next to him, of course, in this committee hearing.
Absolutely. So the fact that he told the lie in the first place, they seem to be just about willing to accept could have been an accident, but that he didn't take any measures, it seems, to go on to set the record straight is the problem. So that's where it comes down to recklessly misleading rather than knowingly misleading, which might result in a shorter suspension than the 10 days, which would trigger the recall petition, which would trigger the by-election, which could trigger Boris losing his seat. Lots of steps.
Lots of triggering, lots of bants, whatever that means. Thank you very much indeed for explaining that. More bants to come and a bit of weather as well. Stay with us here on GB News Live.
Hello, I'm Alex Deakin, and this is your latest weather forecast from the Met Office. A blustery, boisterous day out there, gusty winds bringing in plenty of heavy showers. Between the downpours, there will be some sunshine, but nowhere immune from the downpours. This area of low pressure is responsible. There's also a little wiggle of a waving weather front just pushing up from the south. That will bring some more persistent rain later across southern areas, certainly increasing the cloud through the afternoon here. So any sunny spells will be fairly hazy. Then lots of showers for Northern Ireland, Northern England, North Wales. Thunderstorm is possible. Not as many showers over northern Scotland, although the Northern Isles likely to stay fairly cloudy with some outbreaks of rain. The wind's a little lighter in the north as well, but elsewhere it's a blustery, gusty day. But it is quite mild. Temperatures could still reach 14 or 15 Celsius when the sun is out. We'll see a bit more in the way of rain coming into southern counties through this evening. May get into the Midlands for a time, that more persistent rain before clearing its way through East Anglia. And then we're back to more showers later in the night, chiefly for Scotland, Northern Ireland and Northern England, with southern areas becoming dry and clear. A bit of a fresher night, but still temperatures mostly staying in mid-single figures. On to Friday's details, and again, it's a case of sunshine and showers. Quite a bit of sunshine early on over the Midlands and Eastern England. Generally dry start here, but there'll be showers elsewhere. Slow-moving showers across northern parts. Further south, the showers will brush through fairly rapidly on a stiff and gusty wind. Again, between the showers, the sun will pop out, and that'll lift the temperatures into the teens in the south, 10 to 12 further north. The showery weather will continue during Friday evening. Notice the circulation here. That's where the low pressure is moving to, bringing lots of showers on Friday night across Northern Ireland and Western Scotland. But as that low starts to pull away, it does look a little drier as we go through the weekend. Certainly Sunday drier than Saturday, and it's also going to turn colder.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes & Co.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Click that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like.
Absolutely.
On Jubes & Co. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
It's 2 o'clock. Very good afternoon to you. You're with GB News Live and me, Mark Longhurst. And coming up for you this afternoon, the Bank of England increasing the base rate for the 11th time, despite hopes they could keep them on hold. So it now stands at 4.25%. We'll have the latest reaction on what it means for you. Debt charities saying it's now really hurting the most vulnerable in society. Has Boris Johnson done enough to save his political future? After yesterday's Partygate hearing, the jury is out as to whether he'll face suspension from the House of Commons and wave his political future goodbye. And we're heading over to Paris with a journalist who's seen the latest on the public's outrage against the government's pension reforms. The French, yes, they're revolting. The streets littered with thousands of tons of uncollected rubbish as the government tries to delay the retirement age. Before that, all the latest headlines with Rhiannon.
Mark, thank you. It's 1 minute past 2. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. The Bank of England has raised the interest rate for an 11th consecutive time from 4% to 4.25%. It's in a bid to slow down the rising cost of living and comes after a surprise rise in inflation, as well as a decision by the US Federal Reserve to raise its key rate. The central bank's also announced it expects the economy to grow slightly in the second quarter, revising a previous forecast it would contract. Junior doctors in England will strike for 4 days between April the 11th and 15th. The British Medical Association is accusing the government of not being serious about resolving the pay dispute and says Health Secretary Steve Barclay has failed to make a credible offer. The union says the new round of strikes come with great frustration, but that they'll not stop until they're paid what they're worth. Well, we can cross live now to Hillsborough Castle in Northern Ireland, where Northern Ireland Secretary Chris Heaton-Harris is speaking following MPs who overwhelmingly backed the government in the Commons yesterday.
Put our best efforts into making that deal work. That's both us and the European Union. And we also had conversations about the budget for Northern Ireland for next year. Now, I think, this is a matter for the executive, and it very much should be a matter for the executive to be doing, and we need an executive up and running for that to happen. I very much have made that point. I do not want to be in a position where I have to set a budget. There are going to be some tough decisions to be taken, and they should be taken by local politicians, locally elected, democratically elected people for the people they represent. And but if the executive isn't up and running in short order, then I will be setting a budget in the next few weeks to make sure that public services in Northern Ireland can continue to run. And I know there are significant pressures on those public services, but again, they are best sorted out by people returning to the executive. And that was basically the sum of the conversations. I don't know who I'm going to take questions from first. Shall we start? Tracy.
Northern Ireland Secretary Chris Heaton-Harris there speaking at Hillsborough Castle at a meeting of Stormont leaders. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens now, though. It's back to Mark.
Rhiannon, thank you very much indeed. More reaction, of course, coming up to what we heard there at Hillsborough. But let's get reaction now to what's been happening at the Bank of England. The pound has moved higher after the decision at midday to raise the base rate by another 0.25% to 4.25%. The Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, saying he supports that decision by saying it will help to get a grip on inflation. Well, hotfoot back from the bank is our business and economics editor Liam Halligan with On the Money. So not quite
panting
as bad.
heavily.
Well, yeah, and you've done very well.
Across London.
Absolutely. Hot foot indeed. And clearly we were expecting perhaps a move because of what we had with the inflation figure earlier in the week. But then looking at what we had in the Fed, the US central bank, and what they were saying, the sort of it's trying not to frighten the horses, if you like, because the banks are really suffering because of higher interest rates. So they had a real difficult decision to make this time.
It's really confusing even for the policymakers who set interest rates at both the Federal Reserve in the US and here in the UK, and indeed the European Central Bank that controls the Eurozone. They're confused about what to do, so journalists and the rest of us trying to follow what they're doing, it is quite complex. Look, we just had a bit of a blow on inflation. Inflation's been coming down since October, and yet the February number was up again from 10.1 to 10.4%. the Bank of England couldn't really do nothing. It had to raise interest rates in its own mind anyway as a result of that. And yet it didn't really want to raise interest rates because we've had all these jitters with banking stocks, financial markets looking quite shaky. And raising interest rates too far, too fast is just the kind of thing that could lead to a big loss of confidence in financial markets. So it may be that they've got away with it. On the graph, GB News viewers on television can see since 2017, interest rates did go up gradually. Then lockdown happened and they went back down to zero. And then they stayed at 0 or 0.25% throughout lockdown. And since then, since inflation kicked in, we've had 11 interest rate rises, Mark, in 18 months. That's pretty punishing. This latest interest rate rise, just a quarter of a percentage point, that will put about £300 to £350 on the annual payments of a family with a mortgage of £200,000, which is not a huge mortgage.
But it's on top of everything else.
On top of everything else. So this is real money. And so the Bank of England will have been reluctant to raise interest rates, but given the fact that inflation had reversed in February, I don't think it had any choice.
Yeah, I mean, the bank, is independent, but we've got, a pretty stark warning from Jeremy Hunt saying, we've got to get a grip of inflation, and they've got to take that into context. But we do get this assessment from the bank as well on these days as to what's going to happen. And that's looking slightly better, indicating perhaps that growth will be coming in the economy and that inflation perhaps will start to go down as Jeremy Hunt wants it to.
Well, when it does its interest rate decisions, it does 8 a year, the bank releases the minutes of the meeting and maybe some other analysis of what it thinks it's going on. And I'd say these Bank of England growth forecasts, the Bank of England hasn't covered itself in glory in recent months and years in terms of its forecast. All economic forecasting is very, very difficult. But the bank, until very recently, was predicting a recession throughout the whole of 2023.
Although a shallow one, as it said.
Which I always thought was absurd. But now the bank is saying it does expect some growth this year. Of course, they're following the Office for Budget Responsibility, saying the same thing. That was linked to Jeremy Hunt's budget statement. So I think the bank is just playing catch-up in terms of its forecasting. And I'm not saying it's got an easy job. I don't want to be overly critical here. It is a really tough job. But I will always hold to the fact that the bank should have got going with interest rate rises a lot earlier than it did. Inflation was up above 5%, more than double the 2% target before it started actually raising interest rates. It waited far too long. And I think the reason interest rates have had to go up so fast is because the Bank of England was late to start raising rates. And that's why quite a lot of people now in politics, in the commentariat, they're starting to wonder about whether or not the Bank of England needs some sort of reform.
Yeah, and the question, will it work this time? Because obviously we had the situation where a lot of the inflationary pressure was coming from outside and, the war in Ukraine and what was happening with energy prices. This time round, it looks as if a lot of it is actually domestic pressure. So this last squeeze may have an effect on that.
I do think inflation will halve by the end of the year to 4 or 5%. The Bank of England agrees. In fact, even though inflation just went up in February, the Bank of England's sort of end-of-year projection is slightly lower for inflation than it was just a few months ago. But that's because these things happen with a lag. But look, what's really driving inflation now? It's not fuel and energy prices because oil prices have come down and wholesale electricity and gas prices have come down. They will feed through into family bills and bills for firms. What's really driving it is food, because food is obviously produced with a lag mark. By definition, you've got to grow this stuff. And the farmers who were planting last year, the fertiliser they were paying for was sky high because of the war in Ukraine. The fuel that they were filling their tractors and drilling machines with to sow their seeds and plant their crops, that was sky high.
Transport costs.
And so all those sky-high costs are within the supply chain still, and they will have to be expressed at the supermarket checkout. So we still have high food price inflation. We've got the highest food price inflation since the late 1970s, 18.2% in February, food price inflation. Food price inflation is nearly always the last thing to drop out of the high inflation figures because food is produced with a lag. But there is some light at the end of the tunnel. This could have been a half-point interest rate rise. It was just a quarter point. There is growth. The green shoots are here now. We have to be very, very careful the government doesn't trample on them by imposing too much tax, in my view. and inflation is starting to come down.
Right, so let's hold on and hope, perhaps, is the watchword. Thank you for that, Liam. Let's now get the views of Jamie Craden, who's joining us, Head of Mortgage Products at the Family Building Society. Jamie, bearing in mind what we just heard with Liam there, people may think, oh, no, not again, but there may be, some light at the end of this tunnel if they can just hold on for the coming months.
Yeah, certainly. As you say, the recent rise today may well impact tracker rate mortgages, discount rate mortgages, which are linked to lenders' standard variable rates. But certainly in the last few months, with the slightly more stable environment, less volatile than certainly after the mini budget, we've seen lenders gradually reducing fixed rates. There has been some slow in that in the very recent weeks, given kind of what's been happening with SVB and Credit Suisse. But certainly the signs are that fixed rate mortgages, which is the predominant type of product that families have out there, are coming down.
Yeah, I mean, I think actually they're at the lowest level for 6 months at the moment, even though obviously they're well above 5% for many people. So, yeah, inevitable question, what should people do? Because a lot of existing fixed rate deals are coming to an end. People are wanting to move house. They're wondering, do we just sit on a variable rate for a couple of months and then switch? What should they be doing?
Well, that's exactly it. I mean, it obviously depends on each individual circumstances, but very many people are looking to variable rates when they previously didn't, because some of those do not come with early repayment charges. And certainly at the moment, there's a kind of a wait and see attitude that has come around. Whereas in previous years, we've certainly just seen people roll from fixed rate to fixed rate to fixed rate. But very much kind of what we're seeing is people hedging their bets, waiting to see if fixed rates come down and then potentially locking in slightly later in the year.
And what about the housing market in general then? Because that's the other fear. People remember the days, some of them at least, of negative equity and so on. We haven't had the housing crash, even though obviously there's been a bit of turbulence.
Yes, exactly that. There were noises, particularly after the mini budget towards the end of last year, about potential significant reductions in house prices, but we certainly haven't seen that. So we're starting to potentially see transactions on a purchase level level out, not much house price growth, but certainly it's more of a stabilisation and a stable period than a crash that we're seeing.
Yeah, and we always think of the spring being the time when the housing market picks up, people get out and about, they start thinking about buying and selling and so on. So I guess these coming weeks will be pretty important to see which way that goes.
Yes, exactly. And at this point in time, as Liam touched upon, the expectation is that this may well be the last bank rate rise. And as there's more certainty creeps into financial markets, we may well see, as I said, fixed rates come down, which then when we get into the spring, summertime, we may see rates lower, which will improve borrower affordability.
Yeah. Just a last quick thought with you being at the Family Building Society. I mean, is there any hope that you and other banks and building societies could actually try and absorb this for a month or two and not actually push the mortgage rates higher?
Well, yes. I mean, certainly there will be lenders who are perhaps behind in bank rate movements or maybe even slightly ahead, but very much the view of around about 4.25 to 4.5 in bank rate is where many markets and lenders have seen for a few months now. So I think a lot of this recent movement is kind of baked into prices now. So I wouldn't expect some drastic increases.
Jamie, thank you very much indeed for updating us. And of course, as ever, people should be getting some advice, of course, before making those decisions. So what does it mean out and about as people reassess their monthly bills? Well, Jeff Moody, our West of England reporter, has been speaking to people at the South Molton Market down in Devon. This is what he found.
Well, yes, I've been here in South Molton Pannier Market all morning talking to the stall holders and customers about how they're reacting to this rise in interest rates. I've been trying to get a viewpoint from somebody who has something positive to say about the rise in interest rates, and I've found it. You have something positive to say, don't you, sir?
I do, actually, yes. I'm town clerk of South Molton Town Council. I'm in charge of the finances. Now, the interest rate rises for the council are actually a very good thing. We don't borrow any money, but we've sold some land and sold some of our assets off. We've actually got some surplus cash. So obviously I invest those in bonds, and we've been getting 0.1% over the last 2 or 3 years. Now I'm getting about 2.53%, which is great because it's quite substantial, our savings, and it actually brings in a lot of income to the council. So this is a really positive slant on it, for the council's point of view only, obviously.
And what do you do with that money?
We can invest it in the town, invest it in the pannier market. It just gives us more cash. Because obviously, we're finding things difficult with the electricity. We've got electricity here in all our buildings, etc. So it's just good to have some extra income apart from council tax, which is where we get most of our income from. So a real positive note for once on it.
Good. I'm very pleased to hear that. And talking of positive notes, the market here has done incredibly well, hasn't it, at a very difficult time?
Absolutely. It's quite incredible, really. And people are actually spending money. In here, we're getting a lot of footfall, especially since we came first, as you know, in the whole of the UK.
Just explain first in what?
The parish community markets. So it's all the markets in the UK, the parish markets and council markets. We came first, which is fantastic, absolutely brilliant. But yes, I'm amazed at what people. I think if people like the market, if they like where they're going, and they like the goods that are being sold, they're going to pay money for it and actually spend some money, which is happening here.
And from a stallholder's point of view, their overheads are a lot less, aren't they? Because they don't have premises.
Just the market fee, pitch fee, and that's it, really. So, yeah, obviously they got the travelling, which obviously put their overheads up a bit. Not all of them are that local. Some do come from Bude and places like that. So, it all adds up for them. So they need the good takings.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much indeed for talking to me. Well, there you go. Something positive. Somebody that believes that this rise in interest rates is a good thing. Back to you.
Jeff Moody in South Molton in Devon, wonderful part of the world. More reaction, of course, to come to that interest rate decision, but more reaction now to the Boris Johnson show, that grilling for more than 3 hours in front of a committee of MPs to actually discuss whether he intentionally misled Parliament over so-called Partygate at number 10. The former Prime Minister insisting that all were essential work-related events and that lockdown rules or guidance was followed. But he also maintained that, hand on heart, he did not deliberately mislead MPs over the gatherings when he spoke in the Commons. Well, if a proposal for a 10-day suspension, of course, is voted through by those MPs, a by-election in his seat of Uxbridge could be triggered, and indications, at least from some, that he could well lose that if it has to go to a ballot, and then the end of his political career. Joining us now, Conservative councillor Claire Pearsall with her assessment of it. Because the other issue, Claire, of course, is that we had this vote on the Windsor framework where Boris Johnson announced he'd be voting against Rishi Sunak along with Liz Truss. We didn't get the rebellion, so one asks, is his day done as the big dog stopped barking?
I think so. I think that Boris Johnson has had his moment, he's had his chance, and really does now need to either relax onto the backbenches and look after the constituents of Uxbridge, as he's elected to do, or he needs to take himself out of Parliament. He isn't going to come back as leader of the party or as Prime Minister. And I think that the small rebellion that was held yesterday is just a testament to that. He doesn't have the following that he used to. Once upon a time, if Boris Johnson was involved in a rebellion, you knew the numbers would be there and the government would be in trouble with whatever was going through. So I think realistically now his moment has gone.
Is it important, however, that he secures his legacy in perhaps acknowledging that he did his best to cope with COVID, even though mistakes were made?
I think that would be actually the best course of action for him. There were some really good things that came out of the pandemic and some really good schemes. The vaccination scheme, whether you agree with vaccinations or not, was done superbly. And the rollout of that really is down to the team around Boris Johnson in number 10 at the time. So there were some really good things, the community spirit that came through in the pandemic and everybody helping out. So I do think that he needs to cement that and perhaps let go of all of the other bits and pieces, stop talking about events and leaving parties, and just concentrate on what he did do. The war in Ukraine, his work with Zelensky, things like that. that is what he should be remembered for, and not the kind of debacle that we saw yesterday in the House of Commons.
OK, and we reflect it's 3 years since lockdown, but we also had the unedifying WhatsApp revelations, of course, in the Telegraph, and what we've learned about how the government was trying to cope with it. Has all this done long-term damage to the Conservative Party as we head, we think, perhaps to an autumn election next year?
Of course it does damage. If you take those WhatsApp conversations and roll them out, it looks as if nothing was taken seriously. It was a group of people making light of what was a very serious situation for the majority of people. Liberty was taken away. People were trying their best. Children were out of education. To find that the health secretary and senior officials were finding this a joke, I think is appalling. And the government needs to repair itself. The Conservative Party needs to repair. And I think we're going to get there. It's going to be a long road, but I have faith in them for that.
Yeah, Liam Fox made an interesting observation that we now have a government that under-promises but over-delivers, and that's the best way forward. But just one last thought on that in terms of Rishi Sunak. I mean, how damaging could this issue on his tax be? You know, this is a multimillionaire out of touch with the rest of the country.
No, he said he would publish his tax return, and he did that. You would question the timing, but he has put it out there, and he has paid a lot of tax. Now, I know people are going to quibble over the figures, but the majority of this is in capital gains. I think that we should just put that to one side. I don't want to see everybody's tax returns being put out there. You can see that he's paid legitimately what he had to, and I think that because he earns a lot of money, his family has a lot of money, well, that's good for him. You know, I don't want to get too tied up in the politics of envy, which inevitably is what this comes down to.
Claire, thanks very much indeed for joining us there in Sevenoaks and updating us with your view. Good to speak to you again. Thank you very much indeed. Still to come too, plenty more reaction to what we've been hearing from the Bank of England and what it means for you. We'll have all the analysis coming up. Let's take a look at the weather now, see if that can cheer us up.
Hello, I'm Alex Deakin, and this is your latest weather update from the Met Office. More heavy showers to come through the rest of today, and tomorrow will be pretty similar as well. Gusty winds, a bit of sunshine in between the showers. It's a messy old pressure situation. Low pressure basically dominant, a whole host of weather fronts basically suggesting bands of showers will be moving in. These weather fronts in the southeast, though, bringing more persistent rain here. Quite a wet evening, some heavy bursts of rain. That rain edging away to the east, though, and should be gone from easternmost parts of England by midnight. Showers will follow, plenty of them coming into North Wales, Northern Ireland and across much of Scotland. Some heavy ones, hail, thunder possible too. Clearer spells will develop across the south, but the breeze will stop temperatures falling too far, so we start the day at 6s and 7s. We start off with quite a bit of sunshine over the Midlands and eastern England on Friday morning. Elsewhere, it'll be a case of dodging the downpours, and then the showers develop pretty widely from late morning onwards. Heavy, thundery showers, but tending to zip through on a brisk wind. The winds will be quite light in parts of northern Scotland, meaning the showers here could be quite slow moving. Still actually quite mild, 10 or 11 across the north, 14, 15 possible further south in the brighter spells. But plenty more heavy showers to come during Friday evening, particularly for southern Scotland, Northern Ireland, moving into northern England as we head into the weekend. So more showers on Saturday. Again, won't rain all day. There'll be some brighter spells, but it could be pretty wet for Edinburgh and down into the far northeast of England with a brisk wind, certainly for much of the morning. Sunny spells developing elsewhere, and a switch in the wind direction, bringing cooler air in across northern areas during Saturday. Further south, again, double figures, perhaps into the teens with some sunshine. But by the time we get to Sunday, temperatures will be falling across the board as that northerly wind brings chillier air for all.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The people's channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prisons?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Let's get out and about for you here on GB News Live and update you on freeports, new freeports for Wales at Anglesey and a combined one between Port Talbot and Milford Haven to create, thousands of jobs, drive up growth and level up opportunities across Wales, according to both UK and Welsh governments. An estimated £5 billion in private and public investment expected for the site. So let's speak now who's someone... probably welcoming that. Virginia Crosby, Conservative MP for Ynys Môn in North Wales. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. And I think they're wanting these to get up and running pretty quickly. Operational by the end of the year, is that right?
Yes, that's right. Pranandar, good afternoon from Anglesey. It's a really brilliant day for Anglesey and a brilliant day for the future of our island. And the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, coming here today really demonstrates that the UK government, this Conservative government, is committed about levelling up and committed about levelling up places like Ynys Môn that have been left behind for decades.
Yeah, we've got some pictures of him meeting everyone and walking about. I mean, what will it actually mean? I mean, is this going to be sort of piles of containers with, big shipping? Or is it, I think, perhaps more of a green energy thing using tide and wind power?
That's right. This is all about creating jobs and an investment on the island here. Anglesey is known as Energy Island. We've got wind, waves, solar, tidal, and hopefully new nuclear at Wilver. And I've been taking companies around the island, companies like GE, Hitachi, Last Energy, Bechtel, Westinghouse, Rolls-Royce. All these companies are interested in investing in Anglesey, particularly now we've got freeport status. This is all about creating, as you mentioned, thousands of good quality jobs. In the near term, we're talking 3,500 jobs. In the longer term, over 13,000 jobs with an additional £1 billion of economic investment.
Yeah, we can see the tree in the back garden there actually being blown about with the wind. So, well, in fact, yeah, as the camera goes with the wind as well. However, I mean, does that mean it's going to be reliant very much on weather conditions, or will there be other things taking place there at the Freeport?
Well, I think what makes a freeport is it's a great place to invest and it's a great place to trade. If you look at something like a small modular reactor, one of these small nuclear reactors, they're worth around £2 billion. You can get all the materials coming to Anglesey. You can get them manufactured and put together as a small modular reactor. That would involve 800 people, really, really good quality jobs. And then you can actually export. You can export to the rest of the world. So it's not necessarily dependent on the weather. It's all about connectivity. We've got Holyhead, which is the second busiest roll-on port in the UK. We've got a gateway to Europe with that whole sort of trade corridor as well.
And then just to mention, of course, down south, we've got a combined free port with Milford Haven and Port Talbot, where, of course, you know, one is an oil terminal, the other with the steelworks, both old technologies, old industry, some would argue. They're going to be brought up into, a green economy?
That's right. They're really championing offshore wind and floating offshore wind. And that really ties on in with what we're doing on Anglesey as well. We've got significant offshore wind with BP Mona and BP Morgan. And we've also got Morlice, which is tidal, and Minesto as well. Really taking advantage of all that the sea and the solar has got to offer. And not only that, we've got new nuclear, hopefully, at Wilver. So really, Wales is punching above its weight and contributing to our energy security, keeping those energy costs down and delivering net zero.
Well, thank you very much indeed for updating us there in a breezy Anglesey. Good to speak to you. Thank you very much indeed. And, of course, we'll follow the process of those new free ports, as we said, coming up by the end of the year. Thank you very much indeed. Let's move now on to Paris in a moment to speak to a journalist there with the latest on the outrage against the government's change on pensions. And, yes, the French have taken to the streets to protest. There's a surprise. That coming up in a moment. Let's get the latest headlines now with Rhiannon.
Thank you, Mark. It's 2:32. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. The Bank of England has raised the interest rate for an 11th time from 4% to 4.25%. It's in a bid to slow down the rising cost of living and comes after a surprise rise in inflation, as well as a decision by the US Federal Reserve to raise its key rate. The central bank's also announced it expects the economy to grow slightly in the second quarter, revising a previous forecast it would contract. The Northern Ireland Secretary has told Stormont leaders there's no negotiating the Windsor framework and that it will become international law. He's been holding talks over the Prime Minister's post-Brexit trade deal at Hillsborough Castle after a key element of the Windsor framework, known as the Stormont break, was passed through the Commons yesterday by 515 votes to 29. The DUP's leader, Sir Geoffrey Donaldson's, called the deal a sticking plaster that won't work, but Chris Heaton-Harris disagrees.
Well, the Windsor framework's not a sticking plaster. It's a solution to the problems that were produced by the protocol, and it will work. And the two sides to those negotiations which have concluded, the UK government and the European Union, are going to make that the framework work. Now I think it's down to the communities of Northern Ireland to work out how best it can work for them. I think it can work for them really well. I do believe it will herald, alongside the 25th anniversary of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement, the next 25 years could be all about prosperity if everybody puts their shoulder to the wheel.
Junior doctors in England will strike for 4 days between April the 11th and 15th. The British Medical Associations accuse the government of not being serious about resolving the pay dispute and says Health Secretary Steve Barclay's failed to make a credible offer. The union says the new round of strikes comes with great frustration, but won't stop until they're paid what they're worth. The UK and Welsh governments have announced 2 free ports will be created in Wales for the first time in a bid to boost the country's economy. The Celtic and Anglesey free ports in North Wales are expected to attract almost £5 billion in investment. It's also hoped they'll generate up to 20,000 jobs by the end of the decade. And Nicola Sturgeon says it's been a profound honour as she faced her final First Minister's questions after more than 8 years as head of the Scottish Government. She announced last month she was stepping down, saying she no longer had the stamina to carry on in the pressured and demanding role. The First Minister says she'd remain in office until her successor's chosen.
Being First Minister has been variously, often all at once, challenging, exhilarating and exhausting. But every single day, without exception, it has been an utter privilege.
TV, DAB, digital radio, tune in and online. This is GB News. Don't go anywhere. Mark's back in just a moment.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now? Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
And welcome back to GB News Live. Let's take you now to France for the 9th day of national protests across the country. President Macron standing firm on his controversial pension reform, with the government trying to move the retirement age from 62, yes, that's the age at the moment, to an extra 2 years to 64. And it's caused spontaneous protests across the country, being held on a daily basis. Hundreds of arrests, accusations of heavy-handed tactics by police. Nearly 12,000 police being deployed today to try and control protests in several cities. Streets of Paris remaining, a bit of a smelly mess, with around 7,000 tonnes of uncollected rubbish littering the streets there. The country seems to be suffering problems with trains, flights, teachers all joining strikes to pressure the government to U-turn. However, President Macron says, I'll be the bad guy to get the reforms done. Joining us now from France, journalist Anne-Elisabeth Moutet, joining us from The Telegraph. Anne-Elisabeth, it looks as if Macron's saying, I'm going to go for broke on this. I'm not going to turn as previous French presidents have.
It is what he's saying. You never know with him the day he decides to turn. But on the other hand, it can't get much worse. It's also worth mentioning that if it were only the age of retirement in France, it would be sort of disproportionate. But by now, he's managed to alienate so many French citizens that they are essentially sort of answering a referendum question that hasn't been asked, whether they want Macron in or out. And what they're really saying is they want him out.
So this is wider and deeper than just the pension reform, then?
Yes, it's much wider in many reasons, because that's a reform that if he had decided to pass it through with that constitutional article 49.3 back in September in the House, this is something that many French prime ministers left and right have done. They've done it 100 times, actually. And it would have passed. But there was this complete sort of not listening to people for several months, and the feeling increasingly that people were being despised. And Macron himself himself mismanaged this, in that at the beginning, when you had demonstrations, they were organized by the unions. They were completely orderly. You had no breakage. You had sort of no violence. And instead of recognizing that he was very lucky not to have a sort of yellow vest movements as in 4 years ago, he had the union, but he didn't even want to receive the unions, and he should have.
And you mentioned there the Gilets jaunes, of course. Remember the protests across the country at that time. And a specific problem, for instance, this time in Paris, with all the sort of dustbin collections and the rubbish piling up on the streets. So it seems that lots of things are coming together at the same time for Macron.
In many ways. He's also not helped by the fact that the mayor of Paris told that she supported the strike and decided not to call this a health emergency and to get the rubbish collected, so that all of this is accumulated. And just as when King Charles is coming next week, he's going to be greeted by rats and rubbish and a really ugly city.
Yeah, and the royal visit, we think, may have to change to perhaps to the Elysee Palace, where there's more security, announcements that, things perhaps might be a little bit too fruity on the streets for the king to see.
It's going to be interesting to see what changes. I would imagine the visit and the king, their reaction would be, we can take anything and we will go wherever it was planned to do. That's being co-organised by the French and the British government, because this is a state visit. It's not a private visit of the king. It is something which is mostly masterminded by Number 10 and the Foreign Office. There's the optics of a dinner which has been planned for a long time at Versailles for the king, which is perfectly reasonable, but which looks incredibly bad when French citizens are really complaining also about the cost of living. And there's the sort of very Marie Antoinette-ish luxury thing in the most emblematic palace in France.
Yeah, let them eat cake. We remember. We shall see whether it's cake or something rather more edible coming up at the weekend for that visit. And Elizabeth, thank you very much indeed for your view there from Paris. Thank you. And we'll keep you updated, of course, on the royal visit as well at the weekend. But let's take a look at what you've been telling us in the inbox. GBviews at gbnews.uk. Of course, indeed, on these French protests, Michael says it's funny how Britons just accept whatever the government throws at them. We should take some examples from France. Maybe not seeing the burning rubbish bins in the streets, I don't know. Adrian, in 2008, I managed to extend the lifetime of my mortgage, which brought down the monthly payments. This could be a way of coping for today's mortgage holders. Yes, overpaying when times are good. Good point. Kevin, meanwhile, on Partygate, Boris says ignorance is no defence. You tell a police officer you didn't know stealing was an offence, it wouldn't wash. But politicians playing a different rule of law. Sue, meanwhile, why are people surprised the inflation rate has gone up slightly? Inflation is supply-driven, not demand-driven, which is why raising interest rates have had no effect on it. In addition, we have had all these people on strike, especially rail workers, which would have had an effect on it. I think we ought to get you on the programme, actually. It sounds as if you know what you're talking about. But all thanks for getting in touch. We'll keep your views coming and reflect on them, of course. Now, yesterday, Prime Minister Rishi Sunak seeing off that backbench revolt by Tory hardliners on the Brexit deal for trading arrangements for Northern Ireland, the so-called Windsor framework. Just 22 Conservative MPs in the end rebelling, including former Prime Ministers Boris Johnson and Liz Truss, to join the DUP MPs. Well, the so-called Stormont break was passed comfortably by 515 votes to 29, Labour and other opposition parties backing it. What's that mean for Northern Ireland? Let's get the views once more of our reporter, Doogie Beattie, who is there. And Doogie, we were just discussing this, of course, just a day or two ago, that even if this goes through, it doesn't necessarily mean power sharing back at Stormont. Indeed, the difficulties could deepen there.
Indeed, and this is the political hangover. This is the morning after the night before the political parties of Northern Ireland met here at the Secretary of State's residence in Northern Ireland, Hillsborough Castle. They were discussing the budget because there's no government, of course, here, so the Secretary of State, by direct rule, will set a budget. But he's really now pushing, he's very confident, and he's pushing hard to have the Northern Ireland government back in place. Now, every political party that came out said the same thing, that they were told the deal is done. Geoffrey Donaldson, Sir Geoffrey, came out the head of the DUP, and of course they are the largest unionist party, and they are refusing to go back into Stormont because, well, they say it's holding them inside the EU and taking them away from the UK. And this is what Sir Geoffrey had to say.
Well, we've had a very constructive discussion with the Secretary of State. We talked about the current political situation, obviously, and the ongoing work on the Windsor framework. We are continuing to engage with the government on this. We've made clear that what is there at the moment is insufficient, and we need to do more work, whether that's clarification around how some of this will work, but fundamentally reworking and change where it is needed, so that we get to a place where arrangements respect Northern Ireland's place within the United Kingdom and its internal market. And of course we also talked to the Secretary of State about the forthcoming budget for the new financial year that is about to begin.
Well, he did talk to the Secretary of State about the new financial budget for the next year. But of course, when the Assembly here was in place, it wouldn't set a programme for government. It ended up with a £65 million black hole, and that's what the Secretary of State is currently having to fix. So it does make you wonder, may they be better without the executive being in place? But it almost seemed that Sir Geoffrey was at a different meeting from anybody else, because Chris Heaton-Harris, very buoyant, very, very confident in what he was saying, came to the microphone and he had a totally different story. This is what he had to say.
I've just been having conversations with the party leaders and representatives of political parties here in the lovely Hillsborough Castle. The things I've been talking about the Windsor framework, how a deal that everybody said could not be done between the UK government and the European Union has been done to solve all the practical and many other issues that were caused by the Northern Ireland Protocol of the past, and that deal is done. And that deal is going to be accepted at a joint committee meeting tomorrow and will become international law shortly afterwards. There is no renegotiating of that deal. We are now going to put our best efforts into making that deal work. That's both us and the European Union.
Well, there you can see that. He's basically saying no more negotiating. There is, of course, a board that has been out looking at what is going on for the DUP. They were told they would have time to consult. He obviously doesn't care about that. They are now really pushing for Joe Biden's arrival here to have the institutions in Stormont back up and running to celebrate the 25th anniversary of the Good Friday Agreement. And when you hear that, you may think that it might actually backfire.
OK, Doogie, we'll see what emerges. But as you say, two different tales of the same story and different assessments there. Thank you very much for updating us. Now, let's reflect that the Prince of Wales has been making a surprise visit to Poland to thank British and Polish troops for their support in helping Ukraine defend its territory. Today, the Prince of Wales echoing his late grandmother, the Queen, by laying a wreath at a monument dedicated to an unknown soldier in Poland. This from our royal reporter Cameron Walker in Warsaw.
Well, Prince William has just left a food hall here in Warsaw. He has been meeting young Ukrainian refugees who have integrated into Polish society because they arrived here pretty much as soon as the war started, having fled their homeland and fled the fighting in Ukraine to come here to Poland for safety. It was perhaps the most casual of the engagements that Prince William has undertaken during the surprise visit to Poland over the last couple of days. He was wearing casual clothing, perhaps because he was meeting younger Polish refugees. And it very much was a theme, I think, of Prince William's visits here, shining a light on the refugee crisis and also the humanity shown by the Polish community here in Warsaw and indeed across the country. The other purpose, I think, is troops and personally thanking British and Polish troops for their part in supporting the people of Ukraine as they defend their territory against the Russian invasion. He spent a majority of yesterday in the southeastern Poland, close to the border with Ukraine, viewing military equipment, as well as personally thanking those Ukrainian and British troops for working together as a team. And Prince William today, before he came to the food market here, had a meeting with the Polish President, President Duda, where he expressed his thanks and gratitude to the people of Poland for supporting Ukrainian refugees when they come here. And I think it's that strengthening of ties between Britain and Poland which is very significant here, because this whole visit comes the same week that President Xi of China was invited on a state visit to Moscow at the invitation of Russian President Vladimir Putin to strengthen the ties between China and Russia, whereas perhaps British officials are hoping Prince William's visit here to Poland is going to strengthen the ties between Britain and Poland, of course, two NATO allies. It's very much an organisation which Putin perhaps fears, or at least sees as hostile. Whereas I think most people in the world very much see it as a way to guarantee global security. But Prince William also visited the tomb of the unknown soldier here. It was an engagement which echoed his grandmother's engagement back in 1996 when Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, were here on a state visit to Poland. He laid a wreath at the tomb of the unknown soldier, which symbolises all of those Polish soldiers who have laid down their lives for their freedom.
Cameron updating us there in Warsaw, our royal correspondent, on that historic trip by the Prince of Wales. Now, England's Euro 2024 qualifying campaign kicking off against Italy tonight in Naples. The Three Lions' first match since the World Cup quarter-final defeat by France. But England have not won away to Italy in more than 60 years. But could Gareth Southgate's team be about to end that run? Let's speak now to sports journalist Ben Jacobs. But Ben, first we reflect, the attention at the moment is about off the field in Naples and what the England fans could be facing there.
It is, and during the Champions League tie where Napoli were involved at the same venue, there was trouble, unfortunately, in the city, and it was a very difficult situation for police to deal with. At the moment, things are looking calm, but fans have been told to be cautious that have travelled over there. From the Italian perspective, they've made it clear that these are usually away fans in their perspective causing trouble rather than necessarily anything planned at the Italian end. But it's a volatile situation. There's two sides to every story, and police are on red alert. I think the only thing that's different is being an international match, and even though there's rivalry between Italy and England, and there was also, let's not forget, very worrying scenes and crowd trouble ahead of the Euros final as well, with fans trying to break their way into Wembley Stadium, many without tickets. The backdrop to this game is also, from the Italian side, about celebrating the life of Gianluca Vialli, who was a part of Roberto Mancini's coaching staff. And because this is emotional and sentimental, hopefully, as a consequence, both the Italian fans and the English fans will buy into what is an opener for qualifying and an occasion to celebrate the life of Vialli. And many Chelsea fans, for example, know that player very well. And as a consequence, it will be more cordial, we hope, but it's one to keep an eye on both inside the stadium and outside it over the course of the coming hours.
Yeah, I was going to reflect that Vialli, much loved, of course, by many England football supporters, those Chelsea supporters, and a great player. So, I mean, is there going to be a minute's silence and a proper reflection within the stadium?
There will be a tribute. Italy will wear a special message on their shirts to Gianluca Vialli, because, as I say, not only is there that affinity, I think from all sides, it's fair to say, but also he was directly a part of the coaching staff and celebrating, therefore, Italy's Euros win before he sadly died at the age of 58. So it's going to be emotional, and I think everybody will come together to celebrate him. We're going to see banners, we're going to see memorials, and at this stage, it's unclear whether the crowd will break into a minute's applause or do a minute's silence or mark his life during the game as well. But look out for a series of tributes, including those special messages on the shirts of the Italian players.
And let's ask the question, who's going to win?
Well, as you said, Italy have got the record. England don't have a good track record of getting a result in Italy. It's a big game for both sides because Italy are looking to respond not having made the World Cup. England's first game since going out of the World Cup. And I think Harry Kane has a personal milestone as well because he can break Wayne Rooney's goal-scoring record. And I fancy England to get something from the game. I'm not sitting on the fence. My genuine prediction is that England won't win, but they won't lose. And I'm going to therefore go for a high-scoring 2-2 draw.
Oh, interesting. OK, well, we'll hold you to that. But as you say, let's hope there's no crowd trouble and that we get a good match as well. Ben, thank you very much indeed. And now Gwyneth Paltrow. Not often we say that on GB News Live. Hollywood star and her trial continuing in Utah today. She's accused of crashing into a man while skiing in 2016. These are live pictures from the court. Can't see her at the moment because her counsel, her lawyer, had objected to the cameras actually focusing on her in this particular trial at Deer Valley Resort. We heard yesterday that injuries sustained by the man that she collided with on a ski slope could not have been plausibly caused by him crashing into her. The retired optometrist Terry Sanderson allegedly having a traumatic brain injury as a result of this crash in 2016 in Deer Valley. The actress being sued for allegedly slamming into him from behind, according to the court, and he was left unresponsive with several broken ribs. It's alleged that she then carried on down the slope without checking to see what his condition was, despite him suffering a fracture and a head injury. And the court hearing that after that she had not assessed his medical condition, and Ms Paltrow attending the court in person to actually hear the evidence, although we've not actually heard from her at the moment. So we'll update you as we get more from there, but doesn't look as if she's appeared at the moment. And we'll see what her lawyer says about the cameras being trained on her. Normally doesn't worry too much about that, of course, having made her career in Hollywood. More on that as we get it. But also, let's move on to the fact that we've got the interest rate decision today at 4.25%. More reaction coming up with that. Patrick's with you for the rest of the afternoon, and we'll be with you back at 12 noon tomorrow. See you then.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters,